Hello everyone, I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I always thought my sleep paralysis episodes were bad enough on their own. I used to wake up in the middle of the night, unable to move, staring at my ceiling with this heavy pressure on my chest. It felt like my own body was betraying me, but at least those moments ended when I could finally jerk myself awake. I'd sit up panting, wipe the sweat off my forehead and try to calm down. That was my usual routine. Then a few months ago something else began to happen. I realized I wasn't alone during those episodes. I sensed something at the edge of my bed, like a figure sitting there watching me, and since then it hasn't really gone away. My name is Marcus. I live alone in a small one-bedroom apartment. It's on the second floor of an older building. The place has these narrow hallways and creaky wooden floors. At night every little sound stands out. Pipes groan in the walls, neighbors shuffle around in the rooms next door. I've lived here for about 2 years. My sleep paralysis started long before I moved here, so I'm used to it, but everything changed one night around 3 months back. That night I was lying on my bed half asleep. I felt that familiar heaviness in my limbs. My eyelids were shut, but I sensed I wasn't fully asleep. Usually when that feeling creeps in, I know I'm about to have a bad time. My chest tightens and I can't move my arms. If I try to wiggle my toes, I feel a numb sensation that's typical for me, but suddenly I felt a weight near my feet. It was subtle at first, like someone had just placed a hand on my mattress, then it grew heavier. I tried to open my eyes, but I couldn't. My heart pounded and my breath got shallow. That weight was real. I felt the mattress sag. I managed to flick my eyes open. My vision was blurry from the paralysis. I could only see shapes and shadows, but there was something tall sitting on the edge of the bed. It looked like a person, but I couldn't see a face. It had a long, slender form. Its head was tilted down like it was looking straight at me. I heard a low rumbling noise. It wasn't like a growl exactly. It was more like a deep vibration, almost a muted hum coming from its direction. I tried to scream or at least call out, but no sound left my throat. My tongue felt glued to the roof of my mouth. Then as quickly as it started, it ended. My arms and legs jerked and I was free to move again. The weight on the bed was gone. I sprang up, drenched in sweat, feeling the sheets clinging to my back. My heart felt like it was going to pound its way out of my chest. I turned on the lamp beside me and stared at the foot of my bed. Nothing was there, but I could still feel that weird presence. My arms were shaking, my mouth was dry. I didn't sleep again that night. That was the first time I realized something might actually be in my room with me. Over the following weeks the same thing happened. I'd wake up in the middle of the night paralyzed and see that same tall, faceless shape. It always sat at the edge of my bed or stood in the corner of my room. I never got a clear look at any features, just a blank space where a face should be, with an elongated neck and shoulders that sloped downward. Every time it made that low humming noise as if it was trying to tell me something. After about 2 weeks of this, I started avoiding going to bed. I'd try to stay up late and fall asleep on the couch with the TV on, but that didn't help. One night I dozed off on the couch around 1 o'clock in the morning and I woke up in that same frozen state. My eyes were open, but I couldn't move. The TV was still on, but the screen had gone into standby mode, so the room was dark. I felt the cushion sink next to me. I turned my eye sideways and saw that shape again. It was sitting on the couch, leaning toward me. That hum vibrated in my ears like a distant engine. My pulse throbbed in my temples and I tried to move my hand to push it away, but my body refused to cooperate. When I finally snapped out of it, the figure was gone, but my fear had only grown stronger I realized this thing wasn't just tied to my bedroom, it was tied to me, or at least it felt that way. I went to the kitchen, splashed cold water on my face, and stood there with the lights on for a good half hour. My skin felt clammy and my stomach churned every time I heard a creak from the hallway. I jumped. I thought I saw movement in the corners, but it was probably just my mind, except I wasn't sure anymore if I could tell the difference. As the days passed, my nights got worse. Whenever I did manage to fall asleep, the figure would appear during my paralysis. That was terrifying, but even after I woke up, I felt it watching me. When I walked around my apartment, I caught myself glancing at the dark corners. Sometimes I thought I saw a silhouette or a shadow shift, but it was never clearly there. Still, that sensation of being watched wouldn't go away. I started doing small things to cope. I bought extra lamps for the living room so I could light up every angle. I kept my bedroom door open, thinking if I could see all the way down the hall, I'd feel safer. But the more I tried to light the place up, the more the shadows seemed to dance along the walls. Every flicker of a light bulb or movement of my own reflection in the windows made my stomach tighten. My nights turned into a cycle of anxiety, half sleep, and jolting awakenings. One evening I decided to record myself while I slept. I set up my phone on a tripod and pressed record. I was desperate for proof that I wasn't imagining things. I thought if I saw something on video, at least I'd know I wasn't crazy. I went to bed around midnight. Falling asleep took an hour or two because I kept getting stuck in my thoughts. Eventually I drifted off. The next thing I remember is that awful pressure on my chest. My arms were pinned at my sides. My mouth wouldn't open. I stared up at the ceiling. The deep noise echoed in my ears again. With my eyes I tried to look around the room, but I couldn't tilt my head. Finally I noticed the figure standing against the far wall near my closet. It was so tall that its head nearly touched the ceiling. That shapeless face stared in my direction. The humming sound seemed louder this time. I felt something cold on my arms, like a chill passing over my skin. My eyes started to water because I couldn't blink freely. My heart hammered in my chest. I thought I was going to pass out. Then the figure took a step toward the bed. It leaned forward and I felt its presence looming over me. My breath caught in my throat. I tried one last time to move my arms, but it was pointless. It stood there hovering until I finally snapped awake, able to move again. I sat up immediately, gasping for air. I grabbed my phone and checked the video. My hand shook and I almost dropped it. As I watched the recording, I could see myself sleeping, twisting a bit, but not much else. The entire time my body looked still except for a few twitches. There was no tall figure in the frame. There was no weird shape near the closet. No sign of movement. No changes in the lighting. It was just me in bed, apparently sleeping normally. My chest felt tight with disappointment and fear. I knew what I saw and felt, but the video showed nothing. I began to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. My boss at work started asking if I was okay because I'd arrived with dark circles under my eyes, barely able to focus on simple tasks. My coworkers looked concerned. Whenever I spaced out at my desk, I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder, worried that the figure would follow me into the office. My head throbbed from lack of sleep. My hand shook when I tried to type. Even grabbing a cup of coffee made me edgy because I'd see my reflection in the coffee machine's shiny surface and half expect that faceless silhouette behind me. At home, I tried sleeping in different positions. I put more pillows under my head. I moved my bed closer to the door. Nothing worked. Every time I fell asleep, even for a quick nap, I'd sense that presence again. Sometimes it sat on my bed, sometimes it hovered in the corner, sometimes I heard it in the hallway before it showed itself. The sound was always that same low rumble, almost mechanical. A few times I thought I heard a faint rasped like it was attempting to form words, but I couldn't make out anything clear. One night I woke from a deep sleep without any paralysis. For a second I was relieved I had a normal awakening, but I felt uneasy. My bedroom was dark and the air felt thick. I reached for my bedside lamp, but before I turned it on I noticed something shifting in the corner. I froze. My mind told me not to move, but my instincts told me to get the light on fast. My hand brushed the switch and the lamp came on. For a split second I thought I saw a tall shape pressed against the wall, but then it vanished from my line of sight. My breath came in shallow gasps. I looked around, but the corner was empty. I sat there, blinking. I didn't want to turn the lamp off again, so I just sat with the light on, hugging my knees, trying to calm myself. My heart wouldn't stop racing. It felt like I was stuck in a state of constant fear even when I wasn't asleep. After that I got worried I might do something irrational, so I tried to be practical. I set up lights in every room of my apartment. I got a standing lamp for the hallway and left it on all night. My electric bill skyrocketed, but I didn't care. I kept the TV on. The 24th of July in the living room, just for some noise. The present still lingered, though shadows seemed to move at the edges of my vision. When I walked from the kitchen to the bedroom, I felt like I was being followed. If I stopped suddenly, I almost expected to bump into something right behind me. My appetite disappeared. My hands trembled whenever I tried to cook dinner. I usually ate canned food or something I could microwave because the thought of using the stove felt too stressful. I kept glancing around the kitchen, waiting for that low hum to echo through the room. Few times I thought I heard it through the vent above the stove. Then I realized it was just the refrigerator motor kicking in, or so I told myself. Things got so bad that I started sleeping with the TV on in my bedroom too. I moved a small set in there and let it run all night, thinking the noise would keep my mind from falling into that half dream state where the figure appeared. It worked for a bit. I'd fall asleep only to wake up 2 or 3 hours later feeling that same old heaviness in my arms and legs. Sure enough, the shape would be there, standing by the door or at the foot of the bed. My eyes would tear up from the strain of trying to move. My jaw would ache from clenching. My body would jerk itself awake, and then I'd see the TV still on. The flickering images reflect seeing off my sweaty face. No matter what I tried, I couldn't escape that visitor. One afternoon I sat in my living room with all the blinds closed, flipping channels. My head was pounding and I had this dull ache behind my eyes. I was exhausted. It was around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but I felt like I hadn't slept in days. I decided to close my eyes for just a moment. I leaned back against the couch cushions and let myself drift off. I hoped a daytime nap might be safer. I'm not sure how long I slept. The next thing I remember, I heard that low rumble. It felt closer than ever. I tried to open my eyes, but I realized I was stuck again. My heart pounded, my wrists twitched, but nothing happened. That hum got louder and I felt something brush against my ankle. It was a slight pressure, like a cold hand touching my leg. I panicked, my throat tightened. I forced my eyes open just enough to see the shape standing over me. It looked like it was bending down, reaching for me. I couldn't see a face, but I sensed it staring. My chest burned from my rapid heartbeat. I tried to shout, but no sound came out. The shape leaned in, almost touching my forehead. I could feel a chill spreading over my face. Then, as always, my body snapped awake. I jerked forward, almost falling off the couch. My heart hammered against my ribs. My forehead was slick with sweat. I scrambled for the remote and turned on the lights around the living room, all while breathing heavily. I sat there staring at the spot where I saw the figure. The air felt thick, like I was breathing through a wet towel. That corner of the room looked empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still there, just waiting for me to close my eyes again. Now I'm at a point where I expect this presence in every quiet moment. It doesn't only show up during sleep paralysis. I sense it when I'm fully awake, especially in the dim hallways or the corners of my kitchen. Sometimes I'll walk into the bathroom and see a flicker of movement in the mirror before realizing it's just me, but I can't get rid of the tension in my muscles or the sweat on my palms. I'm constantly on edge. I haven't told many people about this. A friend of mine came over once and asked why I had so many lights on. I mumbled something about needing extra illumination because of the building's wiring problems. He shrugged and let it go. I didn't have the courage to explain. I know how it would sound telling someone I'm haunted by a faceless figure that shows up when I'm paralyzed and then lingers in the corners of my home. Sounds insane, but I know what I feel. I see it. I hear that low rumble. I feel the mattress sink under its weight. That's enough for me to take it seriously. Every night is a battle. I try to stay awake as long as possible, then I eventually pass out from exhaustion. I wake up in cold sweats, my pulse racing. Sometimes I find myself standing in the hallway not remembering when I got out of bed. Other times I wake up with the TV blasting, lights on, every door open, feeling like I just escaped some chase in a dream, but the figure remains. It's always there in the background, silent except for that deep vibration that haunts my half-sleep. When I open my eyes each morning, I check the corners of the room. I inspect the foot of the bed. I look around hoping it's gone, but I can still sense it there watching me. I live with this constant tension. Every muscle in my body feels tight. My shoulders ache from being so tense all the time. I jump at small noises. My ears ring with that low hum at the slightest trigger. I don't know what it wants or why it's here. I only know it refuses to leave me alone. That's my reality now, and I've stopped questioning whether it's real or not. It doesn't matter. It's real enough in my mind to terrify me, and I feel it in every shallow breath I take. This is my life at the moment. I wake, I see it, I sleep, I feel it, and I can't escape it. I've reached a point where I accept that this might be how things go for me from now on. I just live day to day, checking the corners, leaving the lights on, and waiting for the next moment when my body locks up and that tall, faceless shape appears again. I wish I knew a way to stop it, but right now I'm just trying to hold myself together. That's all I can do, and maybe that's all there is. Maybe I never expected my own bedroom to feel like a threat after my last relationship ended. I thought having a large room to myself would be a relief. The first few nights were quiet. I had space to stretch out, and I didn't have to worry about anyone else's schedule. But everything changed one night when I turned off the lights and settled under my blanket. I felt the mattress sink beside me, as if someone had laid down. The air in the room seemed to thicken. My heart pounded and every breath felt tighter. I didn't see anyone when I opened my eyes, but it felt like a body was right there. When I tried to sit up, my muscles locked. I stayed there staring at the dark, not sure if I was awake or dreaming. Then I heard these soft, muffled breaths followed by low whispers I couldn't understand. I couldn't move or speak. I just lay there completely tense, waiting for morning to come. When the sun rose, I forced myself out of bed, telling myself it was just a weird nightmare. I tried to ignore the feeling that I hadn't been alone all day. I felt distracted at work. My brain kept flashing back to the moment when the bed dipped next to me. I brushed it off. I told myself it was just my imagination, or maybe I'd shifted my weight, but the memory stuck to me. I didn't talk about it with anyone. It felt too strange to share. The next night I climbed into bed with a small sense of dread. The quiet in my place grew heavier. I left a lamp on in the corner, hoping that the soft glow would help me stay calm. For hours I stared at the ceiling, struggling to relax. Eventually I started drifting off. Then it happened. Again the bed sagged as if a weight pressed down on the mattress near my right leg. I bolted upright. The lamp was still on, and I could see the shape of my blanket, but I couldn't see any figure or outline. I felt a chill. It wasn't just a drop in temperature, it was like a line of cold moving across my skin. I swung my legs off the bed, almost stumbling to the floor. My pulse raced and sweat dripped down my face. That moment felt surreal. My eyes scanned the room from the windows to the closet doors. Everything looked normal except for that charged feeling in the air. I walked around checking if the windows were open or if there was any draft. I found nothing unusual. Still, I couldn't shake the sensation that someone was watching me. I tried to go back to bed, but sleep never really came. I dozed off for minutes at a time, snapping awake whenever I felt a slight movement or heard a faint noise. The morning after was rough. My head ached, ADHD, and my eyes burned from lack of sleep. A coworker asked if I was sick. I just said I hadn't slept well. It was the truth, but I couldn't give the real reason. I didn't want people thinking I was losing it. At lunch I tried to distract myself with my phone, but I kept thinking about how I'd be back in that room at night. That evening I lingered in the living room with the TV on until I couldn't keep my eyes open. I was hoping exhaustion would override whatever weird thing was happening. I finally shuffled into my bedroom around 2 in the morning. I didn't even bother turning on the overhead light. I just used my phone's flashlight to find my way to the bed. I dropped onto the mattress, shut my eyes, and prayed for sleep to come fast. I woke up later to the sound of a gentle but steady breathing. I froze. My heart hammered in my chest. The breathing was too close, maybe a foot away from my head. I flipped onto my back and reached for my phone. The screen lit up, casting a weak glow around me. I saw nothing, but the breathing continued, soft and calm. It sounded like a person trying to remain unnoticed. I didn't dare speak. I just slid backward, pressing my spine against the cold wall behind me. Then a new noise started. Whispers hushed and quick, like someone was muttering in another language or speaking too low for me to catch any words. My palms got sweaty. I thought about leaving the room, but I was shaking so hard I couldn't even sit up properly. Eventually I found the courage to stand. I grabbed my pillow and comforter and bolted to the living room. I spent the rest of that night trying to sleep on the couch. Every little sound made me jump. I kept looking at the hallway, expecting to see something peek around the corner. The next day I decided I needed to take some action. I checked the entire house for loose vents or anything that might cause drafts or weird noises. I even inspected the bed frame, the mattress, and the floor under the bed. I found nothing strange. The room was big, but it didn't have any secret doors or hidden spots. Everything was in order. I tried sleeping with music on. I put a small speaker next to the bed, hoping some background noise would cover whatever I'd been hearing. It helped for a while. I managed to doze off without jumping at every sound, but a few hours later I felt something yank my blanket down. About 6 in, I opened my eyes and there was no one there. The blanket slid again, inch by inch. While I watched, my throat went dry. I pulled it back up, but it jerked away like an invisible hand was tugging it. I lost my grip for a second and the blanket nearly fell off the bed. My heart pounded, adrenaline rushed through my body, and I felt a rush of heat in my face. Even though I could sense a cold spot next to me, I sat up, forcing the words out of my mouth. Stop. My voice cracked. Everything went quiet. The blanket stayed in place after that, but I couldn't sleep. I kept the lamp on again, not sure if darkness made this thing stronger or not. I waited until morning, my eyes darting around the room every few seconds. As days turned into weeks, the atmosphere in my bedroom became heavier. At night I tried sleeping in hotels a couple of times just to see if it would give me a break. Those nights were fine, Nothing weird happened, but I couldn't just run away forever. Eventually I'd come home, stare at my bedroom door, and feel my stomach tighten. I started dreading bedtime. Even when I was bone tired, I was scared to lie down because I knew that presence would make itself known in some small but terrifying way. One evening I tried to face it head on. I went to my room early, switched on every light, and sat on the bed. I said aloud, "Whoever's here, show yourself." I waited, my eyes roamed the walls. I listened for any sign of movement. Nothing happened. Minutes passed and my heart rate slowed a bit. Maybe it was done, maybe I was just scaring myself for no reason, but the moment I switched off the lamp and lay down, I felt a heavy weight press on my chest. My breaths came out in short, desperate gasps. My limbs went stiff and I couldn't lift my arms or legs. I panicked. My mind screamed for me to move, but my body wouldn't respond. I heard that breathing again right near my ear. The pressure on my chest increased. I felt like I was drowning in the air. When the weight finally lifted, I sucked in a sharp breath and scrambled off the bed. My entire body trembled. My hands were numb. I hurried to the bathroom, flicked on the lights, and splashed water on my face. My reflection looked pale with dark circles around my eyes. I just stood there feeling more exhausted and helpless than ever. I kept trying to explain it logically, but nothing made sense. I didn't have a single piece of solid evidence other than my own experiences. Over the next few nights, the same pattern continued. I felt the bed sink. I heard the breathing and the whispers. Sometimes the blanket moved. Other times I felt a cold touch on my shoulder or leg, like an icy fingertip brushing against my skin. Each time I reacted with a jolt, my heart racing. My nights became an endless cycle of tension. I started drinking strong coffee to keep myself awake as long as possible, but when I finally passed out from exhaustion, the presence found me again. I tried moving my bedroom furniture around, hoping a different layout would break the tension. It made no difference. I tried sleeping with a bright lamp, a flashlight, or the TV. No matter what I did, the feeling remained. I couldn't see anything, but I knew it was there. Sometimes I thought about telling a friend, but how would I explain it? I was afraid people would assume I was making it up or that I was mentally unstable, so I kept it to myself. I did everything I could to function normally during the day, but my nerves were shot. I became jumpy even at work. I felt on edge, looking over my shoulder like someone was behind me. My chest felt tight. Every time I entered my bedroom, I kept thinking I'd find some sign, footprints, a piece of fabric, something that proved it wasn't just in my head. But there was never anything to see, only those terrifying moments at night. As time went on, I developed a bizarre routine. I'd go to bed and I'd lie there wide awake, waiting. My eyes would dart around, scanning the darkness for movement. Sometimes I'd hear a low breath near my ear and I'd jump. Sometimes I'd feel a gentle push against my back, as though someone was there lying right next to me. I'd freeze, hold my breath, and try to calm the pounding in my chest. The minutes dragged, my body stayed tense, braced for something worse, but it never fully attacked me. It never spoke any clear words. It just lingered, watching, touching, breathing. One night I thought I heard the whisper form my name. It was so faint I couldn't be sure, but it sent a wave of terror through my body. I gripped the blanket so hard my knuckles ached. The cold spot on the mattress moved behind me like it was shifting position. I sat up, turned on the lamp, and stared at the empty space where I'd felt that presence. It was like chasing shadows. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. My throat was dry. My mouth tasted bitter, like fear had left a residue on my tongue. I stayed up the rest of the night just waiting for dawn. At this point I dread going to bed, but I also dread staying awake. Nothing I've done has kept it away for long. Sometimes on really bad nights I'll feel my muscles lock up so hard I can't even scream. My mind scrambles for a plan, but there's nothing concrete to fight. There's no one to chase out of my home. There's just this invisible occupant that refuses to leave me alone. People at work ask why I look so worn out. I lie, telling them I'm working on personal projects at night. Nobody suspects what's really going on. My ex and I aren't on speaking terms, so there's no one I can confide in about this. My life is a strange loop of normal days and horrifying nights. Now every evening when I walk into my bedroom, I feel eyes on me. I can't see them, but it's like stepping into a trap. The tension grips my chest and my thoughts race. I imagine the mattress sinking again, or the blanket peeling away, or that cold invisible hand touching my arm. I've tried sleeping in other parts of the house, but the presentence still comes on the couch. I've felt the cushion dip in the guest room. I've heard that same breathing near my head. It's not confined to my bedroom anymore. It's with me whenever I try to sleep. No matter where I go in this house, most nights I just lie awake, bracing myself for whatever happens. I don't see a shape, but I feel it. I feel that gaze on me, that cold patch near my body. It waits for me to drop my guard. The moment I start to relax, it reminds me that it's there with a tug on the blanket or a soft exhale against my ear. I'm at a point now where I count the hours until sunrise. Morning feels like the only time I can breathe normally. During the day I can almost pretend everything's fine, but my nights are a cycle of fear, tension and fatigue. Nothing I do pushes it away for good. I've stopped thinking it might be my imagination. I know this is real, at least in the sense that I experience it directly. It never reveals itself as a person or a figure, but it's constant. It's an uninvited guest that shares my bed and leaves me shaking. I keep waiting for a final confrontation, but nothing changes. Every night it's the same torment, sinking mattress, cold air, whispers, and that paralyzing grip on my mind. I don't know how long I can live like this. I want to feel safe in my own house, but I can't remember what safety feels like anymore. All I know is that when I lie down, I'm not alone. There's something there watching me, breathing next to me and holding me in place with fear. And every night I wait for it to happen because I know it will. That's the worst part, the waiting. It's the tension that builds before the whispers start, before the bed shifts and before the blanket moves. So that's what my nights have become. I lie here in the dark and wait for that presence to make itself known again. I feel its weight next to me, hear its breath and sense its cold touch. I don't know what it wants and I don't know how to stop it. All I can do is endure it until morning comes and sets me free, at least for a few hours. Then it starts. It's all over again, and that's my life now, trapped in my own bed, haunted by something I can't see but can't escape. I jolted awake on my second night in that old house because I heard footsteps above my bedroom. I turned in early, but the noise sounded like boots on the floor directly overhead. My heart thumped against my ribs as I stared at the ceiling. I lay there wondering if someone had broken in or if there was some animal crawling around in the attic. The problem was I was told there was no attic. The official paperwork for the house said it had 2 floors and nothing else, but after I arrived I discovered a narrow stairway hidden behind a warped bookshelf on the 2nd floor. It led up to a cramped, dusty space with a low ceiling. I found strange symbols carved into the wood up there, and ever since my nights had been tense and uneasy. I'm a middle-aged guy with nothing special going on in my life. I never planned on inheriting anything, let alone a centuries-old house in the middle of nowhere. A distant relative I never met passed away. His lawyer contacted me, said I was next in line, and gave me the keys to the property. I didn't have to pay anything for it, so I figured I might as well check it out. I expected a run-down place, maybe something I could fix up or sell, but I had no idea what I was walking into. The house stands on a large piece of land surrounded by tall trees and thick underbrush. The paint on the exterior is mostly peeled off, revealing grey, with the porch steps creak under my weight. Some windows are cracked and the front door sticks if I don't use my shoulder to push it. The first time I stepped inside, I smelled damp air and old wood. Dust motes floated in the sunlight. Floors squeaked with every step I took. The first floor has a living room, a hallway, a kitchen, and a small bathroom that looks like it hasn't been updated since the 70s. The living room has a tattered couch, a crooked coffee table, and a tall grandfather clock that hasn't worked in years. The second floor has 3 bedrooms and another bathroom. 2 of the bedrooms are empty, just bare floors and chipped paint on the walls. My bedroom has a large bed with a saggy mattress. A small dresser sits in the corner. I placed my suitcase on top of it on the first day and never bothered fully unpacking. I discovered the hidden attic entrance on my 3rd day in the house. I was exploring the second floor hallway and noticed that a tall bookshelf was set into the wall but didn't seem firmly attached. The wood behind it looked different, like it had been cut out. I pushed the bookshelf aside and it slid away from a narrow door. The door stuck. At first I pulled hard. It popped open, revealing a steep stairway that led to a cramped space with slanted ceilings. The air was stale and thick with dust. I coughed as I climbed up and tried to keep my balance on the wobbly steps. Once inside, I looked around with a small flashlight. The attic floor was rough wood covered in grime. A single old trunk sat in the corner. I nudged it open and found nothing except some yellowed newspapers and a broken lamp. I noticed strange symbols carved into the floorboards near the trunk. They looked like circles, lines, and odd shapes I couldn't interpret. I found more of those markings on the walls, hidden behind cobwebs. The shapes were uneven, like they'd been carved in a hurry or with a shaky hand. I ran my fingers over them, feeling the grooves in the wood. My gut twisted and a chill moved up the back of my neck. I didn't understand why someone would carve those symbols here, and I felt a wave of unease. I left the attic and closed the door behind me. That night I struggled to fall asleep. The house was silent at first, except for the usual creaks and groans that come with old buildings. I tossed and turned in bed around midnight. I heard that first round of footsteps. They were slow, deliberate steps right above me. The hair on my arm stood up. I turned on the lamp by my bed, swung my legs over the side and listened. The steps seemed to circle around and then they stopped. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. I picked up a flashlight and walked out into the hallway. I stood under the attic door looking up. Everything was still. I told myself I was imagining things. I stayed there for a minute, then returned to bed, but it kept happening night after night. Footsteps dragged across the attic floor. Sometimes it sounded like pacing, other times it seemed like they rushed from one side of the room to the other. It never lasted more than a couple of minutes, but each time I heard it, my chest went tight. I stayed frozen in bed waiting for it to stop. When morning came, the house felt empty and calm. I tried to convince myself it was just my nerves or some raccoon in the rafters, but I knew it didn't sound like an animal. One evening I decided I couldn't keep ignoring it. I grabbed a lantern from the living room along with a heavy flashlight and waited until it got dark. I turned off all the lights on the second floor, stood in the hallway by the attic entrance and listened. At around 11, I heard a faint scraping noise above me. My hand started shaking a bit and I tightened my grip on the lantern. The scraping turned into clear, steady footsteps. I pulled the attic door open and climbed up slowly, my eyes scanning the dark corners. The beam of the flashlight swept across the floor. I saw dust swirling, but no sign of movement. The symbols on the wood looked darker than before, like the lines had been gouged deeper. I pointed the flashlight around, checking the walls. Nothing, but I felt watched, like the air itself was pressing against me. My breathing got shallow, my arms felt weak. I set the lantern on the floor, shining it to the far edges of the attic. Still no movement. Then I heard a quick tap behind me. I spun around, nearly dropping the flashlight. I saw a flicker of a shadow near the corner. I felt my stomach twist. I shouted, "Who's there?" My voice cracked. No response. The tapping stopped. My heart was pounding so hard that my ears rang. I stood there for another minute, sweat collecting on my forehead. After I convinced myself I was alone, I backed down the stairs, never turning my back on the room. I closed the attic door, pushed the bookshelf back, and went to my bedroom. I locked the door even though I knew it wouldn't help much. I spent the rest of the night awake, listening for anything else. The next morning I tried to focus on cleaning the place and ignoring what had happened. I scrubbed the kitchen floor, wiped the counters, and dusted the old furniture in the living room. I turned on the radio in the kitchen, hoping the background noise would keep me from hearing every little creak in the house. Around mid-afternoon, I decided to open some windows to air the place out. When I opened the windows upstairs, I saw that the roof outside the attic area looked intact. There were no broken shingles or holes where an animal could slip through. I stood in the hallway a while, looking at that hidden door behind the bookshelf. I wanted to seal it shut, but I also worried that might just make things worse. Instead, I left it alone and tried to push the thought out of my head. Later that night, I settled in the living room. I flipped through some old magazines. I found a few references to local folklore and old houses in the area. Most of it was just small town gossip, stories about families that owned land for generations. Nothing jumped out at me. I turned off the lights around 10 and went upstairs. I felt uneasy, but I was too tired to investigate anything else. I got into bed, left the lamp on, and stared at the ceiling. After a while, my eyelids grew heavy. I woke with a jolt when I heard a loud thud above me. My heart slammed into my chest. I reached for the lamp switch, knocking over a glass of water on the bedside table. I cursed under my breath as water spilled onto the floor. I looked up at the ceiling, waiting to hear more. The footsteps started again. They were heavier this time, more insistent. I felt the weight of each step in my gut. I squeezed my eyes shut for a second, trying to steady my breathing. I didn't want to go up there alone in the middle of the night, but I couldn't just lie there listening. I grabbed my flashlight again and walked down the hallway. My legs felt stiff and a cold sweat beat it on my neck. I moved the bookshelf aside, opened the attic door, and aimed the flashlight at the stairs. I climbed up. My mouth felt dry and my pulse hammered at the top. I swept the flashlight across the floor. Dust drifted in the beam. Everything looked the same, except the symbols seemed more pronounced. The lines looked fresh, like they had been carved all over again. My throat went tight. I inched forward, feeling the floor creak under my feet. In the far corner, I saw a shape that looked like a figure hunched over. My heartbeat soared. I froze and blinked. The shape didn't move. I realized it was just an old coat draped over the trunk, something I hadn't noticed before. I let out a shaky breath. My flashlight glided over the walls. Nothing there, no one, but my skin prickled from head to toe. Something felt deeply wrong. It was like the air carried an electric charge. Every hair on my arm stood up. Suddenly a scraping noise came from right behind me. I spun around. The flashlight flickered and I heard the attic door slam shut. I lunged toward the stairs, thinking someone had pulled it from the outside, but the door was just stuck. I yanked it open. I felt my chest tighten with panic. I nearly fell as I stumbled down the steps. I pushed the door closed behind me, shoved the bookshelf back in place, and hurried to my bedroom. My hands trembled so much that I could barely hold the flashlight. I spent the next day making calls to see if I could get someone to check the house. I reached out to a local handyman, told him I thought I heard animals in the attic. He showed up in the afternoon. He checked the roof, the walls, and the small vents. He said he didn't see any signs of infestation, no droppings, no nests, nothing that would explain the noises. When I asked about the hidden attic, he just said it was old. He said the wood up there was rotting in places, but he didn't see any direct cause for strange sounds. He didn't mention the symbols, and I didn't bring them up. I just paid him and thanked him. He left looking a bit uneasy, probably because of my questions that evening. I walked around outside the house with a flashlight, checking every wall and window. All of them seemed sealed. The attic windows were just small vents near the roof. They were intact. I looked around the tree line, but I didn't see anyone lurking out there. The property felt deserted except for me. When I went back inside, I locked every door and window. I stood in the hallway staring at the bookshelf that hid the attic door. A part of me wanted to rip it out, nail the door shut, and never go back up there, but I was also curious about those symbols. I wanted to know why they were there and who put them there. Night fell and I headed to the bedroom. My heart pounded each time I imagined those footsteps above me. I turned on the lamp again like it was some kind of shield against the unknown. Around midnight, I heard the faint sound of creaking wood. I sat up. I watched the dim light dance along the walls. The steps started. They were light, almost like a person tiptoeing. I felt my stomach clench. I grabbed the flashlight and listened. The steps stopped for a moment, then started again, slower and heavier. I stood, walked to the hallway, and stared at the bookshelf. I could see a thin line of light around the edges of the hidden door. That was impossible because I hadn't turned on any light in the attic, yet there it was, a faint glow. I swallowed hard. My palms were sweaty. I took one step forward, then paused. My gut told me to stay away. The glow vanished. The footsteps stopped. I heard something that sounded like quiet breathing from behind the door, but I might have imagined it. My entire body was tense. I took a shaky breath, retreated to my room, and shut the door. I leaned against it, pressing my forehead to the wood. I could hear my pulse thudding in my ears. I realized that whatever was in that attic didn't want me there. The thought made my scalp prickle. I decided I needed to leave the house for a while. In the morning, I threw some clothes into my suitcase, loaded my car, and drove into town. I found a small motel and booked a room. I spent the day pacing around, drinking coffee and staring at the walls. I couldn't get the house out of my head. I tried watching TV to distract myself, but my mind kept drifting back to those footsteps and symbols. I felt drawn to the place, like I had to figure out what was going on. I tried calling an acquaintance who dabbled in historical research, but he didn't pick up. By nightfall, I was too restless to sit in the motel. My hands were shaking again, and I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep. Despite my fear, I decided to return to the house. When I arrived, the moonlight cast long shadows across the front porch. I stepped inside, clicked on my flashlight, and scanned the living room. Everything was still. I walked upstairs. The hallway smelled like dust in old wood. Same as always, the bookshelf was in place, but I noticed the door behind it looked slightly ajar. My heart jumped. I had closed it. There was no question about that. I placed a hand on the bookshelf, then pulled it away. The door stood open an inch or two, like an invitation. I swallowed, feeling my throat go dry. I considered leaving right then, but I couldn't. I wanted answers. I opened the attic door fully and aimed my flashlight up the stairs. The beam trembled because my hand was shaking. I took each step slowly, feeling the wood bend under my weight. My pulse was rapid, and I breathed through my mouth so I wouldn't smell the stale air at the top. I Looked around. The attic was dark except for my flashlight beam. The symbols on the walls and floor seemed deeper now, cut roughly into the wood. I could see little bits of fresh splintered timber like someone had carved them again recently. I felt a crushing weight in my chest. There was no one in sight, but it felt like someone stood right next to me. Breathing down my neck, I heard a footstep behind me. I whipped around, shining the flashlight toward the stairs. Nothing. My breath came in short gasps. My nerves were raw. I kept the flashlight aimed ahead of me, but all I could see were more carvings on the floor. My hand brushed against the trunk and I jerked away. I could almost swear I saw the symbols flicker like they were catching the light, but I couldn't be sure. My head felt light. I forced myself to walk back toward the stairway, step by step, never turning my back on that space. When I reached the door, I slammed it behind me and pushed the bookshelf in front of it. My hand shook the entire time. I went to my room, grabbed my car keys and suitcase and didn't even bother turning off the lights. I raced down the stairs and left the house, locking the door behind me. My heart hammered as I climbed into my car and started the engine. I kept expecting to see someone staring at me from an upstairs window, but I saw nothing except darkness. I'm still not sure what I experienced in that house. All I know is that something in that attic didn't want me there. Each night those footsteps grew more menacing. The symbols changed, becoming more pronounced. I don't know if someone was messing with me or if there's something unexplainable in those walls, but I couldn't stay, and as I pulled away I felt a pressure lift from my chest like I had escaped something that wanted me gone. I never asked for that old place, and I'm not planning on going back. I have no desire to hear those footsteps ever again. If the house wants to keep its secrets, it can have them. I won't be the one to pry any further. I never planned on sharing the story, but I can't keep it inside anymore. My basement has a locked door, and something on the other side keeps calling my name. That's not a figure of speech. I actually hear my name coming through the wood. It started one night and it hasn't stopped since. I need to lay it all out because I'm getting tired of feeling like I'm losing my mind in my own house. I moved here 6 months ago. It's a small 2-story place with a creaky front porch, an outdated kitchen, and a damp basement. The property felt quiet. When I first arrived, I noticed the old door in the basement right away, but I didn't think much of it. The door has a heavy, rusty padlock. The hinges look strong. The wood is thick. I remember giving it a little tug when I was first exploring down there. It didn't budge. I assumed it was a storage room the previous owners used. I had no key and I was busy unpacking the rest of my boxes, so I left it alone. For the first few weeks I spent my time painting walls and rearranging furniture. Work was busy. I would leave early and come back late. The basement turned into a space for junk, old clothes, boxes of tools, random stuff I wasn't ready to throw away. I almost forgot about the door. It was there, locked, and I felt no urge to open it. I had plenty to deal with upstairs. Then one night I was in bed, almost drifting off. Around midnight I heard a repetitive sound. It was faint at first. I thought it was something outside, maybe a branch against a window. I got up, walked around, checked the windows. I couldn't find anything out of place. I tried to settle down again, but the sound got louder. It was a tapping or knocking noise. My stomach felt tight and I noticed my heart beating harder. I could tell the noise was coming from below me. It was coming from the basement. I'm not the type to panic over small sounds, but this one felt different. It had a rhythm. It wasn't random. There was a pause between each knock, like someone was waiting for me to respond. I grabbed my flashlight, threw on a pair of shoes and headed downstairs. I took every step slowly. The house felt colder than usual, or maybe it was just my nerves. When I reached the basement door, the tapping stopped. I Opened the door and flicked the light switch. The basement light was dim, but it showed me enough to see the path to the far side where the locked door stood. There was nothing moving around in the main area. I stepped down carefully, my hand tight on the banister. My flashlight shook in my grip. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and uneven. I walked closer to the locked door. Everything looked normal at first. The padlock was still there, metal flaking off in rust. Then I saw a slight movement in the wood. It looked like the surface pulsed outward. For a split second I froze. My legs felt weak and I felt a flash of heat pass through my chest. I aimed the flashlight directly at the door. The surface moved again, like something pressed against it from the other side. Then I heard my name. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. It had the exact tone someone would use if they were standing 5 feet away, whispering at me through the wood. I backed away. My instincts told me to run upstairs and call someone, but who would I call at that hour with a story like that? I didn't hear any more knocking, but my name echoed in my head. I looked around, searching for any logical explanation. Maybe a draft, maybe some strange echo from the pipes, but it didn't sound like pipes. It sounded like a voice. I took one more look at the door, stepped backward until I reached the stairs, then went up without looking behind me again. I locked the basement door from the inside of the house, then went back to bed. I didn't sleep well the next day. I tried to ignore what happened. I had a pile of emails to answer. I had errands to run. I convinced myself it might have been my imagination, maybe a dream, but as soon as night came I felt uneasy. The house was quiet again. I tried to distract myself with TV, but my mind kept drifting to the locked door. My curiosity was out of control. I wanted to test it. I wanted to go down there and listen, but I also felt this heavy knot in my stomach. I couldn't shake the memory of that voice. It felt too real. Around 11, I finally mustered the courage. I told myself that if I heard anything again I would investigate. Sure enough, right around midnight the tapping started. It had the same slow, methodical pattern as before. It was spaced out like someone was knocking in short bursts. I got off the couch, took my flashlight again, and forced myself down the basement stairs. The second my feet touched the concrete floor, the knocking changed. It became faster, almost urgent, like it could sense I was there. I stood about 10 feet away from the locked door. I shined my flashlight on it and saw the wood quiver at each knock. I smelled this stale, musty odor, and it felt like it was coming from under the door. My mouth went dry and my hands felt clammy. The knock stopped. Then I heard the voice. This time it said my name twice, spaced apart by a couple of seconds. My spine tingled. I could feel my pulse in my neck. My heart felt like it was going to leap out of my chest. I forced myself to speak. My voice shook. I asked who was there. No answer. I asked again. No answer. I placed my palm on the door for a moment. The wood was cold and slightly damp. Then I felt a light pressure from the other side, like a palm pressed back at me. My mind went blank. I jerked my hand away, stumbled back, and turned for the stairs. I raced up, slammed the door shut behind me, and locked it again. That night I couldn't sleep. My body kept trembling. I felt nauseated. But I wasn't sick. I was just tense, like I had adrenaline coursing through me and no way to calm down. Over the next few days I tried to come up with a plan. I knew I had to either open that door or find a way to remove it, but I was terrified of what might happen if I did. The voice didn't sound aggressive, but the situation felt wrong. I tried calling a locksmith, but I didn't have a normal lock. It was this old padlock that seemed stuck. I considered breaking it off with a bolt cutter, but I kept hesitating. Every time I thought about it, my hands would start to sweat and my throat would tighten. I started hearing knocking even during the day. It wasn't as loud as at night, but it was there. I'd be in the kitchen making coffee and I'd catch a faint knock at, or I'd be watching TV and I'd hear a short tap. It always came from the basement. It made it impossible to relax. My nerves were shot. I'd jump at normal house creaks and the sound of the fridge kicking on. I felt like the house had turned against me. One afternoon I went down there with a hammer. I thought maybe I could pry off the hinges or at least see if the wood around them was weak. When I got close, I felt the door shift again. It was a subtle movement, like someone breathing on the other side. My legs felt shaky and I backed up a few steps. I stood still, trying to gather my courage. I tried to calm myself by taking slow breaths, but my heart kept pounding. I told myself to just do it. I walked forward, brought the hammer to the hinge and tested it. The nails were rusted in place. It didn't budge. The door let out a groan, and I heard a soft voice that sounded like it said, "Stop, stop." It was barely audible, but it felt directed at me. I froze. Then I scrambled up the stairs again, nearly tripping. That was the moment I decided to leave it locked for good. Days passed and the presence behind the door became more obvious. I'd hear it shift around at random times. I'd hear low whispers that almost sounded like breathing. My nerves were in a constant state of alert. I avoided the basement as much as possible, only going down to do laundry or grab a tool when absolutely necessary. Every trip down there felt like entering enemy territory. At night the knocking got worse. It sometimes lasted an hour with small breaks in between. I heard my name repeated several times, always in that same neutral tone. It didn't sound angry or pleading. It sounded factual, like someone was testing the name over and over, making sure I heard it. Sometimes I felt a light vibration coming through the floor. When I stood upstairs, it made me feel sick, like I could sense the air shifting below me. I tried sleeping with headphones on, but I could still feel the knocks in my bones. My nights became restless. I jolt awake at small sounds, half convinced the door was open and something was walking around. I installed a better lock at the top of the basement steps just to feel safer. I tested it several times, making sure it was secure. After that I slept a little bit better, but the nightmares kept coming. In these dreams I'd be standing in front of the locked door and it would explode inward, revealing an empty room. But I'd still hear the voice calling my name, echoing in the darkness. One evening I tried to distract myself by inviting a friend over. I didn't tell him about the basement. We hung out in the living room, had a couple of beers, watched a game. Everything was fine until I heard a faint knock from below. He looked at me confused. I shrugged, pretending it was the pipes, but I could feel the blood draining from my face. He didn't ask again, and I didn't offer any explanation. He left a few hours later, and I was back to being alone in the house. It got to the point where I almost couldn't function. I'd hesitate every time I took a step near the basement door. My hands trembled. When I heard a knock, I started leaving lights on at night because the darkness made the knocking sound even louder. I'd lie in bed staring at the wall, counting my own breaths, waiting for the next time I'd hear a soft tap or the voice. The scariest moment happened 2 nights ago. I was in the basement for a quick check to make sure my water heater wasn't leaking. I was near the center of the room, bent over to look at the heater's base. Suddenly I heard scraping on the locked door like fingernails against wood. I felt my stomach drop. I turned with the flashlight, shining it on the door. The scraping stopped. I stood there holding my breath, waiting. Then came a single knock, heavier than usual. My eyes locked onto the wood. I saw it push outward again, but this time it came out an inch or two. It snapped back like a heavy force pulled it from the other side. I stumbled back, nearly losing my footing. I didn't say a word. I just scrambled up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. My lungs felt tight. My throat was on fire from breathing so fast. I slammed the basement door shut. and locked it, then backed away, keeping my eyes on the doorknob. I half expected it to rattle. It stayed still since that night. I haven't gone back down. The knocking continues, but I've blocked it out by cranking up the volume on my TV or keeping music on. I try to go about my daily routine. I cook, I clean, I do my job, but in the background there's always the knowledge that the locked door remains sealed below, with something behind it that calls my name. It never yells, it never begs, it just knocks and repeats my name over and over, like it's waiting for me to open that damn lock. I've considered leaving this house. Part of me wants to pack up and rent a place somewhere else, but that's easier said than done. Selling a house with a locked door in the basement that makes noises isn't easy. Also, there's a part of me that can't walk away without knowing what's in there. I have a hammer, a crowbar, and a strong urge to end this, but every time I muster the courage to go down and break the lock, I remember that cold pressure against my palm. I remember the sound of my name in a quiet basement. I remember that final scrape on the wood, and it stops me in my tracks. My legs feel like lead, my hands shake, and I retreat upstairs again. So now I'm stuck in this cycle. I live here. I hear the knocking. I pretend it's not there. Sometimes I jump at shadows. Sometimes I get close to the basement door just to test my nerves. The presence behind the locked door never gives up. The knocks don't get weaker, the voice doesn't get quieter. If anything, it's more persistent, but it hasn't broken down the door or forced its way out. Maybe it can't, maybe it's just waiting for me to open up. I have no idea. It's been 2 days since I last went downstairs. Tonight I heard 3 loud knocks around 11. I felt the vibrations in my feet. I decided to write this down. I'm not trying to pass it off as a horror story or a joke. This is my life right now. I can hear the tapping as I type. My name is being whispered in that low tone again, muffled but steady. I don't know how much longer I can ignore it. My nerves are a mess. My head hurts, my fingers won't stop shaking. I'm sitting in the living room, every light turned on. I'm taking quick, shallow breaths. I wish I had a solution, but I don't. I only know that the pre-sentence won't leave. The door stays locked, and I'm here in my own house, trapped in this standoff with something on the other side of a door I was never supposed to open. I locked the door to my old workshop in the city, looked at the chipped paint on the handle, and turned away. I had a small pile of luggage in my car plus a few boxes and a rented truck behind me. I felt tired. I felt a little nervous too. My plan was to get away from all that noise and clutter and move to a quiet place where I could start over. A month earlier, I had found a listing for a dusty old warehouse in a village far from any major road. The price was low and nobody else seemed interested. I bought it after one quick visit. I wanted to turn it into an antique shop because I'd been selling odds and ends for years, and I liked that kind of work. The outside had peeling paint, the roof looked a bit crooked, and the interior smelled like moldy wood, but it felt right. It felt like a new start. The day I arrived in the village, I noticed how slow everything moved. The main street was narrow and quiet. A few people sat on benches talking softly. No one seemed to be in a hurry. I parked in front of my newly purchased warehouse and sat there for a moment, listening to the breeze. The building looked older than I remembered. The sign that used to say Baker's General Store hung crooked above the entrance. The windows were dusty and some boards along the porch were rotted. I thought it would need a lot of work, but I wasn't scared of that. I was more concerned about the structure. I didn't want to sink my savings into a building that might collapse. Still, I got out, stretched my arms, and looked around. A neighbor across the street waved at me. He seemed friendly enough, but I felt a slight chill in the air that had nothing to do with the temperature. I opened the front door of the old warehouse and walked inside. My footsteps stirred up dust. The shelves were still there from when it was a general store. The counters had old receipts and faded advertisements. The smell inside was stale, like wet paper left too long in a corner. I walked to the back room and found a small office. It had a single window facing an overgrown backyard. In that office I saw a trap door in the ceiling right above a wooden desk. I wondered why I hadn't noticed it before. I stood on my toes and poked at it with a broom handle. The door rattled a bit, but it was stuck. I figured I'd deal with it later. I spent the rest of that afternoon hauling boxes in, setting up a makeshift living area in one corner with a cot and a small table. I felt sore from the drive, so I decided to call it a day. That night I tried to sleep on the cot. The building was silent. There were no cars passing by. It was a lot quieter than the city. I liked it at first, but then I started hearing little creaks and pops. Old buildings always make noise, but around midnight I heard something else, a soft dragging sound above me. It was like someone was slowly walking on dusty floorboards, but with a strange limp. The footsteps seemed to move back and forth at times as they stopped, and then I heard something like a muffled growl. My heart started pounding. I could feel a knot in my stomach. I told myself it was probably a raccoon or some stray animal nesting up there, but the sound had a weird rhythm. It wasn't quick like a scampering mouse. It was slower, heavier. I lay in the dark, gripping my blanket, breathing hard. After a few minutes the sounds faded. I stayed awake a long time listening. My throat felt dry and my forehead was damp with sweat. Eventually I drifted off. The next morning I told myself I must have dreamed most of it. I got up, put on my boots, and decided to check that trap door again. I didn't have a ladder, so I stacked a few crates to reach it. When I pushed, it moved, but it seemed jammed from the other side. I used a crowbar and pried it open. It took a few hard shoves before the door gave way. I angled my flashlight beam up there, then hoisted myself through the opening. The attic was cramped with a pitched roof and rafters crisscrossing above. Dust tickled my nose. A single window at the far end let in a weak shaft of light. I saw crates, old trunks and cobwebs hanging from the rafters. The floor creaked under my weight. As I walked I caught a whiff of something foul, like spoiled meat. I put a hand to my nose and tried not to gag. A few feet away I noticed scratch marks on one wall. They were deep and uneven, like something with claws had tried to dig through the wood. My chest tightened. I shone my flashlight across the surface. Several long gouges were spaced out parallel. I had never seen anything like that in a building. The smell got stronger. Near that wall I took a step back and shuddered. My breath felt shaky. I scanned the rest of the attic and saw more gouges near the far corner. Then I heard something rattle behind some stacked crates. It made me freeze. I gripped my flashlight like a weapon, but I didn't see anything move. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear my pulse. I whispered a quick curse under my breath. I stayed there listening. Nothing else happened, so I turned around and made my way back to the opening. I climbed down, put the trap door back, and just stood there, my hands trembling. I had never believed in ghosts or monsters, but something was up there. Maybe it was just a large animal. I told myself it could be a diseased raccoon or some kind of feral dog that found its way in. The smell alone told me something was rotting. I decided I should call someone, maybe an animal control service, but in that village nobody had a listing for such a thing. I asked around later that day, but the neighbors just shrugged. One person suggested I call a handyman who sometimes dealt with pests. I scribbled his number and my notebook. That afternoon I tried to focus on clearing out the front room. I moved dusty shelves, threw out garbage, and started to set up a small display for my antiques. I tried to keep my mind occupied, but every time I glanced at the office I felt a surge of dread. I decided to prop a chair against the trapdoor, hoping that would do something if whatever was up there decided to push its way down. I caught myself laughing nervously at the idea. It felt ridiculous, but I did it anyway. My hands were clammy each time the old boards creaked under my feet. I looked over my shoulder. By evening I was exhausted. I cooked some canned soup on a little camping stove and ate it at my folding table. The rest of the warehouse was dark and silent. I tried to distract myself by checking my phone, but there was spotty reception around 11. I got ready for bed. I turned off the overhead light, leaving only a small lamp near my cot. A dull orange glow filled that corner. My cot was next to a stack of unpacked boxes. I lay there, my mind racing. Eventually I closed my eyes. Then I heard it, the scraping sound above me. It was slow at first, like something heavy dragging itself across the floor. My heart thumped, my breathing grew rapid. I sat up, grabbing the lamp. I didn't want to go investigate, so I just listened. The dragging sound paused, then I heard a low guttural noise. It made my skin crawl. I broke into a cold sweat. I felt a shiver run down my arms. I thought about shouting, but I was afraid of whatever might answer. My mind raced with questions. Was it an animal? Was it a person? The building had been abandoned, so maybe some squatters took refuge in the attic, but those scratch marks didn't look like they were made by normal human fingernails. I couldn't stop imagining those deep gouges in the walls. My stomach churned. I was sweating even though the air felt chilly. Eventually I heard a soft thud, then silence. I lay back, my head on the pillow, staring at the ceiling. I didn't sleep more than a few minutes at a time that night. My body felt tense and every small sound made me jolt. By morning my muscles HDHD and my head throbbed. I decided to call the handyman right away. He said he couldn't come until the weekend. That was 4 days away. I felt my frustration growing, but I had no other lead. I had to stick it out. I spent the next few days sorting through old stock, cleaning shelves, and trying to ignore the occasional scuffling noises above. During the daytime it was quieter. I might hear a soft bump here or there, but nothing like at night. I talked to a couple of locals about the building's history. One older man said it used to be a general store run by a strange family. He didn't say they were violent or anything, just odd. They kept odd hours and closed the store at random times. The man shrugged and said he never saw them much. They left years ago. Nobody else moved in because the roof needed repairs and the structure was old. I asked if anyone ever mentioned strange noises in the attic. He just laughed and said old buildings always creak. That didn't calm my nerves, though. The memory of those claw marks lingered in my mind. On the third night I tried a different approach. I set up a small tape recorder near the office door to see if I could capture the sounds. I also placed a flashlight on the table ready to grab if I needed it. Around midnight I heard the dragging again. My chest tightened, my breathing quickened. The sound seemed slower this time, like it was moving in circles. I heard a scraping noise like claws or nails on wood. My hands were shaking, but I picked up the flashlight and crept toward the office. I stood under the trapdoor, shining the beam at the ceiling. The sound stopped. I waited, my knees feeling weak. My stomach did flips. I could smell that foul odor drifting down. It was the same putrid stink I caught in the attic. I gagged and covered my nose, stumbling back. Then a loud thump came from above. I almost dropped the flashlight. I muttered a curse, backed away and hurried back to my cot, my heart hammering. I sat there wide-eyed, waiting for more sounds. Nothing happened after that. I finally got a few hours of sleep. Around dawn the next morning I played back the tape. The quality was terrible, but I heard a distinct growl and a scraping noise. My pulse quickened as I listened. I couldn't figure out What it could be, it didn't sound like a simple raccoon, it sounded deeper. I felt my mouth go dry. I wiped sweat from my palms. I saved the tape thinking maybe I'd show the handyman when he arrived. If he believed me, maybe we could go up there together. I didn't want to confront this thing alone. When the handyman finally showed up, he was a stocky guy with a thick beard. He had a calm demeanor, but when I told him what I heard, he frowned. He agreed to check the attic. I stood aside as he climbed up the crates and opened the trap door. He sniffed the air. I saw his face twitch at the smell. He switched on a bright work light and hoisted himself up. I waited below, feeling a swirl of relief and dread. He took a few slow steps inside, shining the light around. I heard him grunt. He told me about the claw marks. He said they looked too large to be normal raccoons. He poked around some crates, then I heard him curse softly. He said there was some kind of nest in the corner made of torn fabric and sticks. He also said there was something slimy on the floor. He didn't specify what the smell got so bad he had to come down. After a few minutes he told me he could set some heavy-duty traps, but he wasn't sure it was a typical animal. He suggested I call someone else with more experience. I thanked him, paid him for his time, and watched him drive off. I felt alone again that night. I sat in the front room looking out the window at the dark street. I was tired of feeling helpless. I wanted to chase that thing out or block off the attic entirely, but what if it fought back? I didn't own a gun, and the only weapon I had was a rusty crowbar. I ended up sitting with my back against the wall, listening to the silence. I had that crowbar by my side and my flashlight in my lap. When I heard the dragging steps, I tensed up. My breathing got shallow. I gripped the crowbar and waited. The steps moved across the attic. The growling came next, soft at first, then louder. My heart pounded. The lamp on my makeshift table shook in my unsteady hand. The air felt colder. My neck muscles cramped from tension. I thought about shouting, but I was afraid to provoke it. I sat there for hours, muscles aching, eyelids heavy around, for in the morning the noises stopped. My shirt was soaked with sweat, my mouth tasted bitter. I finally crawled to my cot and collapsed. I felt sick from exhaustion and stress. When I woke up it was almost noon. I forced myself to eat some cereal and tried to think about a plan. Maybe I could board up the trapper, but then I remembered it might tear right through if it had claws strong enough to leave marks in the walls. I paced around the warehouse, feeling my nerves fray. I stared at the phone, not sure who to call. Nobody believed in weird creatures in an attic. They'd just say it's an animal, but animals didn't smell that foul. Animals didn't walk like that. I've been here a few weeks now. The antique shop isn't even open yet. I can't focus on setting up my business. Every night I brace myself for those steps and growls. I'm convinced there's something in that attic that isn't just an animal. The handyman's reaction confirmed it. I don't know how to make it leave. Part of me wonders if I should just pack up and abandon this place, but that would ruin me financially, and a piece of me needs to know what's up there. I feel stuck, like I'm in some standoff with this thing. So far it hasn't come down and I haven't gone up again, but each night the sounds are there and they get a little louder. The smell seems stronger too, seeping through the cracks. I sit here writing this out at my folding table, trying to stay calm. It's past midnight. The rotting odor is drifting through the office door. I can taste it in the back of my throat. My hands keep shaking and I wipe sweat from my forehead every few minutes. Outside the village is silent. No one's awake to hear my shouts. If something happens, I keep thinking about those deep claw marks. I see them in my mind like a warning that I'm trespassing. Part of me wants to grab my flashlight, climb up and face it, but I feel this intense dread when I imagine shining that light into the corner and seeing some shape moving. My heart is racing just from that thought. I'm not Sure, I have the courage to do it. I can hear it now dragging across the attic floor. It's louder than before. The boards creak under its weight, and I hear a ragged, throaty sound. My pulse is pounding in my ears. My hands feel numb. I'm clenching my jaw so tight it hurts. The scraping of claws against wood is right above me. It's slow and deliberate. I don't know what it wants. I don't know why it's here. I only know it won't leave on its own. The thought of trying to force it out makes my stomach twist. I don't know what might happen if I do, but I don't know how much longer I can live like this either. I'm stuck in this old warehouse with something that doesn't belong in the human world, and I'm afraid it's only a matter of time before it decides. This isn't a stalemate anymore. I've collected old electronics for years, but I never expected a single radio to turn my nights into something I can't handle. I found this vintage war-era radio at a neighborhood estate sale. I didn't think much of it at first. It looked sturdy with scratches on the sides and some chip paint around the edges. It smelled like dust in old metal. I paid more than I usually would because the seller insisted it had some historical value. He said soldiers once used it to transmit code messages during an unnamed conflict. That sounded dramatic, but I was curious. I took it home and placed it on a shelf in my living room, between my old projector and a dated reel-to-reel tape player. For the first few days it just sat there. I tested it once by plugging it in, twisting the dial and playing with the volume knob. I heard static. The speaker crackled in that familiar way old radios do. I turned it off and forgot about it. Then about a week later I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning to a faint buzzing noise. I walked out of my bedroom to see the radio glowing. It was on. The DI lights were shining a dim yellow. I approached it, feeling my heart pound because I was sure I had switched it off before going to bed. As I got closer I heard whispers. It was more than one voice blending into each other. They were fast, almost frantic. I tried to make out the words, but I couldn't catch more than random noises. I stared at the power switch. It was still in the off position. That freaked me out. I unplugged the radio. The whispering stopped. I stood there sweating a little even though the room was cool. I took a deep breath. My hand shook and I felt that prickling heat under my skin that comes when something weird happens. I left the radio unplugged, went back to bed and tried to forget it. The next day I told myself I had probably left it half plugged, or maybe the switch was jar-made med. I forced myself to believe it was just an old machine acting up, but it happened again the next night. 3 in the morning I woke up. My alarm clock read 3:07 a.m. I heard whispers. This time they sounded louder. My bedroom door was closed, but I knew the source was the living room. I walked out. The radio was on. The dial glowed and the speaker pushed out overlapping voices. They were not just random noises now. I could almost make out something. It reminded me of a crowd of people speaking at once. My heart pounded harder. My neck felt tense. I went straight for the power cord. It was unplugged already, yet the radio was on, pumping out these weird overlapping voices. I grabbed the radio, shook it once, and it kept going. The static got louder. I felt my stomach twist. The hair on my arm stood up. The voices rose in volume like a whole group shouting. Then after about 10 seconds they dropped to a whisper again. I heard my name, my first name, mixed in with the static. It was like someone in that cluster of voices said it. Then everything stopped. The radio light blinked once and went out. I stood there for a minute, my heart thumping in my chest. My breathing felt shallow. My throat felt dry. I picked up the radio, ran to the kitchen and sat it on the table. I stared at it, half expecting it to come back to life in my hands. It stayed off. I started losing sleep after that. I kept thinking about what I heard. I thought maybe I was dreaming or I was half asleep and imagining things I considered calling an electrician to check my wiring, but that didn't make sense. The radio was unplugged. There shouldn't have been any power. I also thought about telling a friend, but I didn't want to sound crazy. I tried to ignore it and focus on work during the day. It didn't bother me. The radio just sat on the table looking harmless. Then on the fifth night it happened again. 3 o'clock in the morning, I heard the same frantic whispers. I forced myself to get up even though I felt dread creeping up my spine. I walked into the kitchen, turned on the light, and saw the radio glowing. The dial displayed some strange frequency I'd never seen before, like it was stuck between stations. The voices were so intense, like a bunch of people screaming and whispering at the same time. I moved my hand toward the knob. My fingers tingled with nerves. Right when I touched it, the volume dropped. I heard my best friend's name, then I heard my boss's name, then I heard my own name again. I froze. I felt my pulse pounding in my temples. It was like my body wanted to run, but I forced myself to stay. I said hello. My voice sounded shaky. The radio static hissed for a moment. Then I heard a single voice break through. It was a male voice, scratchy and urgent. It said, "Go to the old warehouse on Maple Street." Then everything went silent. The radio light faded out again. I turned the dial. Nothing. Dead. No hum, no static. I spent the rest of that night sitting on the couch, my mind racing. The old warehouse on Maple Street was a place people mentioned sometimes. It's in a rundown part of town. I've driven past it a few times. It's mostly abandoned. I started sweating again. My heart wouldn't slow down. I felt like I needed to do something, but I didn't know what. Why would I go there? It made no sense. I didn't want to risk my safety by following some weird radio transmission, but the fact that it specifically used my name and then my friend's name made me feel like there was something personal going on. For a couple of days nothing happened. I left the radio in the kitchen untouched. I avoided looking at it. I kept the volume knob at 0 even though it didn't matter because the thing seemed to have its own power source. Each night I stayed up late expecting the same occurrence, but the radio stayed quiet. I considered taking it outside and throwing it in the trash, but every time I thought about it I got that twisting feeling in my gut. It was like a wave of nausea. My head would start to ache and I'd recall the sound of those voices. I tried to distract myself with TV, phone calls, anything, but it was always in the back of my mind. Maybe I was scared of what would happen if I tried to destroy it. Maybe I was curious. I'm not sure. On the 8th night, around 3 o'clock in the morning, the radio turned on again. I jumped up from bed when I heard the static. I felt like I was in a nightmare. When I got to the kitchen, the radio was already in the middle of its insane whispering. I could almost see the speaker membrane vibrating with the multiple voices. My head hurt. The low hum was so strong that my teeth buzzed. I clenched my jaw, trying not to panic. Then the voices quieted. One voice deepened. Slow said, "Go there, don't wait." That's all. It was enough to shake me up. I stood there for a long time staring at the radio like it was some animal about to attack me. Eventually I left the kitchen and tried to sleep on the couch. I couldn't close my eyes without hearing that deep voice echo in my head. The next morning I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My arms felt weak, my eyes burned. I tried to drink some coffee and go through my usual routine, but my thoughts kept circling around the warehouse on Maple Street. I decided to drive by it in the daylight. I figured I could take a quick look, see if anything stood out. Around noon I got in my car and drove across town. My palms were sweaty on the steering wheel. When I reached Maple Street, I saw the old warehouse behind a chain-link fence. The place looked deserted. There was graffiti on the walls, broken windows, and a few dumpsters that looked like they hadn't been emptied in years. I didn't see any cars or signs of life. The gate was locked with a rusty chain. I parked across the street for a few minutes just watching nothing happened. I drove home, my mind swirling with possibilities. What was I expecting? Maybe I thought I'd see someone standing at the gate with a sign telling me to come in, or maybe I'd see a notice about the building being condemned. I didn't see anything. I got home, made a sandwich and tried to relax. I wanted to forget it, but it kept nagging at me. That night I sat in my living room staring at the radio from a distance. I kept it unplugged. I turned off most of the lights in the apartment, wanting to see if the radio would glow for hours. It stayed dark. Right as I was about to go to bed, I heard that faint crackle. My body tensed up, my heart started racing. Again the radio's dial glowed faintly. I felt my palms sweat. I walked over and the voices blasted through louder than before. They said names I recognized, friends, co-workers, people I only speak to occasionally. I felt a surge of nausea in my stomach. The voices were frantic, like they were telling secrets too fast for me to understand. I knelt down, put my ear close. They kept repeating, "Come now." Then there was a burst of static and the radio went silent again. I didn't sleep that night. I paced around my living room, checking the windows, making sure the doors were locked. My body felt tense, like I was expecting a stranger to appear around. For in the morning I dozed off on the couch. When I woke up, sunlight was coming in through the blinds. My neck felt stiff, my back hurt. I checked the radio, it was still off. I got up, showered, ate breakfast and decided I couldn't keep living like this. I had to decide whether to destroy the radio or to follow its instructions, but every time I considered trashing it or smashing it with a hammer, I felt that wave of dread. It was almost physical, like a punch in the gut. My temples would start throbbing, my chest felt tight. I called my friend Mike, he knows a bit about electronics. I asked if he wanted an old war-era radio. He laughed and asked if it still worked. I said yes, sort of. I told him it was giving me trouble and that I just wanted it gone. He offered to come by and check it out. I agreed. Maybe if someone else took it I could move on. Mike showed up that evening. I handed him the radio, but as soon as he held it, the volume knob turned on its own. We both heard a brief whisper. He dropped it on the table and stepped back. He asked what that was, his face looking confused. I told him everything, even though I felt like I was rambling. He looked uneasy. He said maybe we should open it up, see if there's some hidden device inside. So we took a screwdriver and tried to remove the back panel. The screws were stuck. One of them was so rusted that the threads came off. When we tried to turn it, Mike shrugged and said he needed to bring some better tools next time. I felt disappointed but also a bit relieved, part of me worried about what we'd find inside. He left the radio there, saying he had to get home for dinner. He promised to come back with more tools another day. That night the radio turned on again. At 3 o'clock in the morning I heard my name. I heard the names of people I knew, and then a new voice said, "You have to come." It kept repeating that. The voices got louder until I could almost feel the vibrations on my skin. My ears rang. I covered them with my hands, but I could still hear the noise. Then suddenly it stopped. The radio clicked off. That was it. At this point I was exhausted. My head throbbed all the time. My eyes had circles under them. I wanted to smash the radio with a hammer, but I felt certain that wouldn't help. I believed that if I tried, the voices would punish me somehow. I know how that sounds, but that's how it felt. My gut was twisted up in knots. I decided I needed to see what would happen if I followed the instructions. Maybe I'd find a clue or something that would let me get rid of this nightmare for good. The next night I prepared myself. I put on a jacket, sturdy shoes, and stuffed a flashlight in my pocket. At around 2:30 in the morning I grabbed my keys and headed to my car. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel. My chest felt tight. I drove through the empty streets toward Maple Street, passing closed shops and dark houses. My headlights cut through the darkness, but I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting someone or something to appear behind me. When I got to the warehouse, it was quiet. The moon was out, giving off a dim light. The chain link fence and rusty lock were still there. I parked across the street and listened. Nothing. I got out of the car, feeling the cool air on my face. It smelled like concrete and stale water from the puddles near the curb. I walked up to the fence. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I tugged on the chain and it rattled loudly. I felt that wave of dread again, like I was doing something I shouldn't, but I reminded myself that staying away wasn't working either. I scanned the fence and saw a loose part near the corner. The chain links were bent. I pushed them aside and managed to squeeze through. My jacket got snagged and I pulled on it until it tore slightly. My breath came out in short bursts. Inside, I turned on my flashlight. The warehouse looked even more run down up close. The windows were all smashed. The paint was peeling. I saw a side door that looked partially open. I stepped over broken glass and trash. My shoes crunched on gravel. I felt exposed. No voices, no sign of anyone. I reached the side door, put my hand on it and pushed it open. It creaked loudly. Inside there was a large open area. My flashlight showed me scattered debris, old crates and some rusted metal beams. The floor looked wet in places. I took a few steps forward, scanning the darkness. My pulse was racing. I felt sweat trickle down my back. I kept thinking any second I'd hear those whispers or see someone, but it was silent. I called out, "Hello." My voice echoed. No reply. I shone the flashlight around, taking slow steps. I saw something that looked like a makeshift table in the corner. When I got closer, I saw a couple of broken radios, some old headphones, and scattered papers. My heart rate sped up. Was someone collecting radios here? I stepped closer. The papers were torn and covered in scribbles. I couldn't read them clearly. They looked like frequencies and random notes. I poked around for a few more minutes. I found nothing else significant. The place was empty. I felt a combination of relief and disappointment. I had expected something dramatic or terrifying. Instead, it was just an empty, decrepit warehouse with a few random items. After a while, I walked out the same way I came. As I squeezed back through the fence, my thoughts raced. Why did the radio want me here? Did I miss something? I drove home, my eyes scanning the rearview mirror the whole way. I parked, went inside, and saw that the radio was glowing. It was on even though it was unplugged. My body froze. My mouth went dry. I walked over, and the voices whispered again. They sounded angry, like they were scolding me. I couldn't make out exact words, but the tone felt accusatory. My stomach nodded. I said I went there. There was nothing. The voices crackled, then cut out. The radio clicked off. Now I'm stuck in this cycle. Every night the radio comes on at 3 o'clock in the morning. The voices repeat that I need to return or that I have to do something else. Sometimes they chant my name, sometimes they mention people in my life. Every time I think about getting rid of it, I feel like I'll lose my mind. The voice gets louder, the static buzzes in my ears, and my body seizes up with anxiety. I'm not sure how to break this connection. I haven't told my friend Mike about the last developments yet. I don't think he'd understand. I'm living in a constant state of tension, waiting for that moment in the early morning when the radio lights up and the voices start. I feel like I'm at their mercy. I don't know what they want, and I'm not sure if I can stand it much longer, but whenever I try to plan a way out, like throwing the radio into a river or smashing it with a sledgehammer, my thoughts get scrambled, my head throbs, my vision blurs, and I can't follow through. I'm trapped with this thing now. Every night I wait for those frantic whispers and that single voice commanding me to go back. I haven't found any solution yet, and I can't see a way out. All I know is that the longer this goes on, the more intense The transmissions get, and I have no idea what's going to happen if I continue to resist. I noticed something strange a few weeks ago when I got out of bed and walked to the bathroom. I was rubbing my eyes and trying to wake up my shoulder ADHD from sleeping on one side too long. When I passed by the mirror in the hallway, I saw my own reflection, which looked normal at first glance. Then I glanced at the floor. My shadow was slower than me, like it took an extra second to catch up. It was almost unnoticeable. I shrugged and thought I was just seeing things. I continued to the bathroom, splashed my face with cold water, and told myself I was probably still half asleep. Later that morning, I was in the kitchen making coffee. I saw my shadow on the wall to my right. The sun was coming through the window, so it made sense. I lifted my arm to scratch my head. My shadow lifted its arm just a tiny bit. After I did, it was maybe a fraction of a second, but my heart skipped. I stood still, stared at the wall, and lifted my other hand. Same thing, it moved slightly behind me like a delayed broadcast. I exhaled and tried to calm down. I decided I should ignore it for now, maybe do some stretches or something. I told myself my eyes were playing tricks under the morning light. I had just started a new project at work and I was feeling tired. I convinced myself it was stress or exhaustion, but it kept happening over the next few days. I saw it every time I was near a well-lit wall or a bright window. My shadow kept lagging behind just enough to make me feel uneasy. One night after a long day, I was in the living room watching some show on TV. I turned my head when I heard a weird crack outside. I thought maybe some animal was near my trash bins. When I turned back, I saw my shadow on the floor. It was creeping to the side in a slow, almost casual movement while I was sitting still. That was the first time I realized it was more than a delay. It was like it was independent, moving on its own. My mouth felt dry. I switched on another lamp to see if maybe multiple light sources were confusing me. The second lamp just made the shadow's edges sharper, but I could see the shape of my own head and shoulders leaning a bit to one side. Even though I wasn't leaning at all, I turned off the TV and went straight to the kitchen to grab some water. My hands were shaking. I gulped down a glass, then another. I tried to gather my thoughts. I stepped carefully back into the living room, but by then my shadow was aligned with my body again, just like normal. I stood in front of the floor lamp, waving my arms around. It mirrored me correctly now. I started to doubt myself. Maybe the tension from work was causing me to hallucinate. I decided I would get more rest. I walked to my bedroom, clicked off the lights, and just went to bed without another thought. The next day I woke up with an odd headache. My arms felt stiff. I went to brush my teeth and looked at myself in the mirror. My shadow was behind me, cast on the tiled wall of the bathroom because of the overhead light. I stared at it for a full minute, checking if it would move on its own. It didn't. I carried on with my morning routine, but I was on edge every time I glanced at the floor or the walls. I felt my stomach nodding up, worried I'd see the shadow doing something strange. It stayed normal for most of the day. That evening, while I was reading in bed, my bedside lamp was the only light on. I started nodding off, letting the book slip. Suddenly I noticed a shifting shape on the wall near my closet. It looked like a shadow was crossing from left to right. My first thought was that a car passed outside with its headlights shining in. I listened for an engine, but everything was quiet. The shape on the wall didn't match anything else in the room. I felt my pulse pounding in my neck. I slid out of bed slowly, not wanting to make sudden movements. I flicked on the overhead light. The walls looked normal again. My shadow was where I expected it to be, but a cold chill ran over my arms. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just walked across my room. I could still feel my chest pounding and my muscles tightening. I Started leaving lamps on in the living room and hallway, hoping constant light would remove the strange illusions. It didn't help much. One evening I was sitting at the kitchen table eating a quick dinner. The overhead fixture was bright enough to illuminate the entire room. I felt a shift in the air like a draft passing by. Then I heard a faint scraping sound by the fridge. I pushed my chair back, slowly got up and checked behind in the fridge. Nothing was there, but when I turned around I saw a dim shape on the far wall near the sink. It was my shadow, except it was on the opposite wall from where it should have been. I didn't see any direct line of light that would cast it there. My stomach cramped up. I felt a wave of cold sweat on my forehead. I stepped closer and the shape slid along the wall almost behind the counter out of my view. That was when I really panicked. I grabbed a large flashlight from a cabinet. I shone it at the wall, searching for the shadow. Nothing. I turned on every light in the apartment. I checked each room, opening closets, looking under furniture, opening curtains, making sure everything was bright. I didn't see it move again, but I was so tense I couldn't sleep. I stayed up in the living room, flipping channels on the TV. I kept my eyes on the walls as much as possible. By early morning I passed out on the couch, still clutching the flashlight. The next night was worse. I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling. I couldn't relax. Around 2 a.m. I felt a weight on my chest, like the air got heavier. I opened my eyes and saw the shadow on the wall next to my bed. It wasn't just a flat outline, it looked thicker, darker. It glided to the corner where my dresser stood. It crouched there like it was watching. My breath got stuck in my throat. I felt a tremor in my hands. I slowly reached for my phone on the nightstand. I wanted to shine the phone's flashlight at it. Before I could do that, the shadow stretched upward, slid across the wall and disappeared into the dim corner. My heart was hammering. I noticed I was sweating so much my shirt was damp. I sat up in bed, turned on the lamp and tried to say something, but my voice was trembling too much. I felt like I should speak to it or yell at it to leave me alone, but I couldn't form the words. I got up, went to the bathroom and splashed water on my face. Then I checked the mirror. My reflection was normal, but I felt this overwhelming fear that something was right behind me. I spun around, saw nothing. I turned the bathroom lights off and on, trying to see if any weird shadows would appear. Nothing, but that didn't calm me down. For the next hour I sat on my bed, propped against the headboard with the overhead light on. I didn't see the shadow again that night, but I couldn't sleep. My head throbbed, my legs felt restless and my stomach kept twisting in knots. I wondered if this thing would somehow take over my body or appear in broad daylight in front of other people. I imagined trying to explain it to someone, but I couldn't figure out how to start that conversation. Eventually I forced myself to lie down and close my eyes. I don't know what time I finally fell asleep, but I woke up the next morning with the light still on. My eyes were bloodshot, my back was stiff, and I felt like I hadn't really rested. I checked around the room. I saw no movement on the walls or floor. I turned off the light and walked to the kitchen to make coffee. Part of me wanted to smash every light bulb in the apartment and live in darkness, but I doubted that would help. I knew this thing was more than a normal shadow. It didn't need a light source anymore. It seemed to appear wherever it wanted. Over the following days I tried to act normal. I went to work, did my tasks, came home. My appetite was shot and I was jumpy at any sudden movement in my peripheral vision. My co-workers asked if I was okay. I lied and said I was dealing with allergies or a mild flu. I forced myself to keep my professional life together, but at night the tension always returned. I'd come home, lock the door, turn on the lights and sit there listening for any weird noises. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of the shadow on a wall and my spine would tense up once or twice. I felt it brush against me like a rush of cold air over my arms, but when I looked there was nothing but the normal darkness in the corners. 2 nights ago I woke up around 3 a.m. I saw the silhouette on my bedroom wall. It was standing, not crouching like it was waiting. I blinked and it stepped away from the wall, but it left a faint outline behind like a smear of darkness. I rubbed my eyes. When I looked again there was nothing there, just the plain wall. I stayed awake until sunrise, too wired to relax. I'm telling this now because it feels like it's getting worse. I can't ignore it. I can't brush it off as a trick of the light. It's real and it's happening in my own apartment. My shadow has broken free in some sense. It doesn't need my movements to dictate what it does. It lingers in the corners, creeps across the floor, appears on the walls without any light source. I can hear faint scraping noises when it's near. I feel a drop in the temperature sometimes, or a heaviness in the air. When it moves it feels like it's looking for a way out, like it wants to tear itself away from me completely. I don't know what it is or how to fight it. I don't know if it's an entity feeding on my fear or if it's something else entirely. I just know it's real and I can't sleep at night. I keep every light on, but that doesn't stop it. It just shows up wherever it wants. The worst part is watching it stand still like it's waiting for the right moment. It makes my hand shake and my heart race. I've thought about leaving this apartment and sleeping in a hotel, but I'm not sure it would help. Wherever I go my shadow follows me. That's what it does. That's what it is. I'm stuck with it. I feel cornered in my own home, trying to keep an eye on every surface it might appear on. I walk around with a flashlight even in daylight, just in case I see it start to move without me. I can't explain it and I'm afraid to tell anyone, so I live with it, hoping it doesn't get stronger, hoping it doesn't decide to do something worse, hoping I don't lose my mind every time it creeps around me. That's all I can do right now. I'm waiting alert, trying not to blink when I see it stirring in the corner of the room. It's there and it wants to be free, and I'm afraid of what will happen if it succeeds. I jolted awake on the couch with my heart pounding. My hand shook against the worn-out cushion and I realized the TV was still on. The screen showed some late-night infomercial, but I couldn't focus on the words. I sat up and wiped sweat off my forehead. Something felt wrong in the room. The air seemed thick and my stomach nodded. I didn't know why. I tried to shake it off, but my eyes kept drifting to the tiny hallway that led to my bedroom. I heard a faint sound like paper rustling. My pulse raced. I pushed myself up, walked toward the noise, and stopped at my bedroom door. The noise came from inside the room, near the old dresser under the window. I opened the door and flicked on the light. My dresser was still closed, the top drawer slightly ajar. I heard another faint rustle. It sounded like pages turning, but I couldn't see anything moving. My arms felt clammy and a shiver ran through my back. I forced myself to move forward. My bare feet dragged on the floor and I felt the rough carpet under my toes. I put my hand on the dresser handle, paused for a second and pulled it. The inside smelled like old fabric and wood. Under a stack of t-shirts I found an odd notebook. It was plain with a black cover and blank pages. I'd never seen it before and I felt a sudden wave of confusion. Maybe I'd tossed it there years ago. I didn't remember. It had no label, no design, nothing on it. I flipped through the pages. They were empty. I placed it on the dresser top and stared at it. My mind was restless, but I told myself it was just a random find. I closed the drawer, took the notebook and turned off the light. I went back to the couch, laid the notebook on the coffee table and sat in silence. I felt a mild headache building behind my eyes. I switched the TV off and Tried to get some rest, but I kept looking at the notebook every few minutes. It never moved. By the time I finally forced myself to lie down, I was exhausted. The next morning I woke up with a stiff neck and a sour taste in my mouth. I got dressed and looked at the notebook again. It was still there, untouched. I shrugged it off, made some coffee, and decided to use it for jotting down ideas for a project I'd been thinking about. I grabbed a pen, sat at my small kitchen table, and started writing a few notes about my schedule for the week. The pen glided smoothly across the paper. After a few lines, I closed the notebook. I didn't notice anything strange at that moment. It was just a normal notebook in my hands. Later in the day, I felt a tug in my gut. Something made me open the notebook again. My chest tightened when I saw pages filled with words in a neat, old-fashioned handwriting. My mouth went dry. These weren't my words. They described places I'd never heard of, places with strange names that looked foreign to me. They mentioned labyrinth stone, altars and rituals. My mind reeled as I flipped through more pages. It wasn't just random scribbles. There were references to hidden rooms, dark corridors, and instructions for rituals involving bizarre artifacts. My hands trembled when I realized one page included details about me, facts I never shared with anyone, not even close friends. It mentioned a scar on my left shoulder from an accident I had as a teenager. I never told anyone about that scar. It's small and people rarely notice it. I felt lightheaded. My breath came fast. I scanned the room to be sure I was alone. My heart thumped. I couldn't stop looking at the words. The handwriting was precise with sharp angles. The letters looked like they'd been written with a fountain pen. The ink had a faded black color. My fingers tingled. I shut the notebook, jumped up from the chair, and paced around the kitchen. I glanced at the clock on the wall. The second hand ticked slowly, and I felt every moment drag. I grabbed my car keys and left the apartment. I needed air. I drove around for a while. Without a clear destination, my head felt heavy and my eyes darted from side to side as if expecting something to appear in the street. I parked at a small coffee shop, went inside and ordered a black coffee. I sat by the window and tried to calm down. The sun shone on the sidewalk and people walked by. Everything seemed normal, but I couldn't erase the image of those pages from my mind. I kept remembering the lines about altars, robed figures chanting in the dark. I wondered if I was having some kind of breakdown. Maybe I'd written those things myself in my sleep. The idea made my stomach churn. After sitting in the coffee shop for an hour, I decided to drive back. I walked up the stairs to my apartment, unlocked the door, and stood in the living room. The notebook was on the kitchen table right where I left it, but I felt a chill, like the temperature had dropped. I approached it slowly, hesitating before picking it up. I noticed more pages filled with writing. It was the same harsh handwriting. There were references to creatures described as tall shadows with long limbs. The text said they inhabited tunnels beneath old buildings. I felt sweat dripping down my neck. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I set the notebook down again and backed away. My eyes stung. I realized I was staring for too long. I forced myself to think clearly. I couldn't just throw it away. I needed to understand what it was I grabbed. I walked to my living room couch and placed it on the coffee table. I sat down, feeling the worn cushions under me. My leg bounced nervously. I reached for my phone and searched online for any clue about notebooks that fill themselves with text. I found nothing but fictional stories and random conspiracy theories. My face felt hot. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the street. A few cars passed by and a man walked his dog. Everything looked normal out there. My apartment felt like a trap. I spent the rest of the evening pacing around, glancing at the notebook every few minutes. I wasn't sure if I should keep reading it. My mind wandered to the references it made about me. How did it know about that scar. What else did it know? Around midnight, I felt too tired to stay awake. I placed the notebook inside the dresser again, closed the drawer, and crawled into bed. My mind was spinning, but my body was exhausted. After a while, I drifted off. A few hours later, I jerked awake to the sound of pages turning. My blood felt cold. I could hear it clearly, like someone flipping through the notebook. I sat up in bed, my hand shaking, my heart hammered. I reached for the lamp. The warm glow filled the room, and I looked at the dresser. The drawer was slightly open again. I stared at it, trying to steady my breath. My mouth felt dry and my arms felt weak. I stood up and walked toward the dresser. The floor creaked under my feet. I pulled the drawer open. The notebook lay there, its pages ruffling on their own. I didn't see any wind or draft. My knees felt like they would give out. I grabbed the notebook. It immediately stopped rustling. My ears rang from the silence that followed. I ran out of the room with the notebook and dropped it on the coffee table. I paced around the living room, rubbing the back of my neck. My skin burned from anxiety. I didn't dare open it again. At that moment, I sat on the couch with my head in my hands, trying to slow my breathing. My mind was racing, but I forced myself to stay still. After several minutes, I stood up, locked the bedroom door, and grabbed a spare blanket. I slept on the couch that night, though I barely got any rest. When morning came, my eyes felt gritty and my neck was sore. I looked at the notebook on the table and decided to read it again. I wanted to see if any new writing had appeared. I opened it carefully. More pages were filled. They mentioned a place called the Red Mill, an old abandoned building outside of town. I'd heard of it before, but only in passing. People said it was shut down years ago. The notebook instructed me to drive there at night. It said I would find a hidden basement. My scalp prickled as I read these words. The text also described a ritual room with strange symbols on the floor. It said there was something important for me to find. I couldn't deny the intense urge to follow these directions. My stomach turned and my legs felt restless. I tried to ignore it, but the urge wouldn't go away. Around noon, I paced back and forth, snapping my fingers in agitation. The apartment felt suffocating. I had nowhere else to go. My thoughts kept returning to that location. I checked the time and told myself I would just drive by, nothing more. I grabbed my jacket, phone and keys, and I left the apartment, leaving the notebook behind. The drive felt long, even though it was only a few miles past the outskirts of town. I saw the Red Mill silhouette at the end of a gravel road. The building was 2 stories with faded red paint and boarded up windows. The surrounding grass was tall, rustling in the breeze. I parked my car on the roadside. I felt my throat tighten. The place looked deserted. I stepped out, feeling a cool wind on my face. Gravel crunched under my shoes. I looked around, no sign of anyone. I walked closer, noticing the boards on the windows were rotted. The door was partially open, hanging on broken hinges. I peeked inside. Dust floated in the sunlight. My eyes stung from the stale air. The interior was mostly empty, with old beams and a warped floor. I glanced around, listening for any noise. I moved slowly through the first room, stepping over broken pieces of wood. My skin crawled. The place felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. I stayed alert, my ears straining for any sound. All I heard was the faint whistle of wind through the cracks in the corner. I spotted a staircase leading down. There was a heavy padlock on a door at the bottom. My heart thumped. The notebook's text mentioned a hidden basement that had to be it. My hands trembled. As I walked down the stairs, I rattled the padlock. It felt old. I looked around for a tool. Rummaging through debris on the floor, I found a rusted crowbar. My palms felt slick as I jammed the crowbar into the lock. It took some effort, but the metal gave way with a loud snap. My ears rang from the impact and my heart pounded. I pulled the door open and a Strong smell of mold hit me. I coughed and covered my nose. I reached for my phone and turned on its flashlight. The beam lit up a narrow hallway. The walls were damp and the floor was uneven concrete. I took a few cautious steps inside. My chest felt tight and my mouth went dry. The flashlight showed an archway at the end leading into a larger room. I approached it, feeling my stomach twist. Inside I saw a circular space. The walls had strange markings carved into them. It was exactly like the notebook had described, lines forming weird shapes, some kind of pattern covering the entire surface. There was a stone platform in the center. It looked smooth, like it had been polished. I walked around it, aiming the flashlight at every corner. My skin tingled. I felt pressure in my ears, like the air was heavy. There was nothing else in the room except the markings and that platform. I wanted to run, but I also felt compelled to stay. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. Then I heard the sound of pages turning. The noise echoed in the damp air. I spun around, shining my light everywhere. I couldn't see anyone. The sound continued for a few seconds, then stopped. My body shook. I remembered the notebook on my coffee table at home, so it couldn't be here yet. The sound was real. My breathing grew ragged, my eyes stung with sweat. I moved toward the archway, planning to get out of there. Suddenly I heard footsteps above me. I froze. I couldn't tell how many steps there were, but they moved slowly across the floor above. My heart thundered. I aimed the flashlight at the door, half expecting someone to appear. The footsteps faded and the silence was worse than before. I stepped back, keeping the light on the hallway. I felt a strong urge to run, so I did. I dashed through the doorway, up the stairs, and back into the main floor. No one was there. My pulse hammered in my ears. I sprinted outside, ran to my car, and jumped in. I locked the doors and sat there for a moment, trying to calm down. My hands were shaking so much that it was hard to grip the steering wheel. I finally started the engine and pulled away from the red mill, my thoughts racing. I felt like I was leaving something unfinished. The notebook's instructions said I would find something important, but I didn't see anything like that. Maybe I missed it, or maybe I wasn't supposed to find it yet. My stomach churned as I drove back to my apartment. The sun was setting, casting a dim orange light on the horizon. My phone buzzed with a message from a friend asking if I wanted to hang out, but I ignored it. My mind was too overwhelmed. Back at my place, I stood in front of the door for a moment, hesitating. I unlocked it and walked in. The notebook wasn't on the coffee table anymore. I felt my chest tighten. I searched the living room, the kitchen, every corner. It was nowhere to be found. My scalp tingled. I walked into my bedroom, flicked on the light, and saw the drawer open. The notebook sat there, its cover angled toward me as if waiting. I stared at it. I didn't want to go near it. My breath came in shallow bursts and my forehead felt clammy. I swallowed hard, took a few steps forward, and picked it up. The cover felt cold. The pages fell open to a new entry. It said that I had made progress and that I was ready for the next step. It mentioned more places, more rituals, more instructions. My vision blurred, beer, and my throat felt tight. I closed the notebook and set it down. I didn't know what to do next. I stood there, my pulse racing, aware of how quiet it was. My ears buzzed now. Every night before I sleep, I hear the pages turning on their own. I lie on the couch with the bedroom door shut, but I still hear them. I wake up to new entries, each one more detailed than the last. They describe impossible things I can't explain. They talk about old tunnels, deserted buildings, hidden artifacts, and steps I need to take to uncover some unknown goal. They talk about me, about my fears and my secrets. I walked into the living room with my coffee. I looked at the photo and paused. It felt different. I stepped closer. I noticed a faint glow behind one of the windows on the upper floor. I could have sworn it hadn't been there before. It looked like a soft light, like Someone had turned on a lamp inside the house. I stood there for a good minute rubbing my eyes. I told myself that maybe I just hadn't paid enough attention when I first put it up. That was my excuse. I finished my coffee and left for the office. The following night I got home late. The house was quiet. I dropped my bag on the couch and checked the photograph again. Now 2 of the windows on the top floor seemed illuminated and the lower windows looked like they had more detail. I saw faint lines inside them, almost like furniture or silhouettes. My arms felt prickly, my chest got tight. My mind told me it was impossible for a photo to change. I tried to breathe slowly. I stared at the print, trying to see if maybe the reflection from my lamp in the living room was causing some optical illusion. I turned the lamp off. The glow in the photo was still there. I stood there in the dark, my eyes fixed on that black and white scene. I couldn't explain it. I ran my hand over the glass, checking for something on the surface, but it was perfectly smooth. There was no smudge or paint. It was just the same photograph, but with new details. It didn't make sense. After that I couldn't stop thinking about it. During the day I would be at my job focusing on emails and phone calls, but a part of me kept replaying the images in my head. Each night I rushed home to see if anything else had changed. It always had. Sometimes the porch looked clearer, like the boards had fresh paint. Another time I could see what appeared to be an open door on the side of the house leading into darkness. Another day I noticed shapes that looked like people standing in the grass. They weren't clear, they were more like shadows, but I could see faint outlines of arms, torsos, legs. The longer I stared at them, the more real they seemed. My throat would go dry and my stomach felt hollow. I tried to distract myself with music, TV, or calling friends, but nothing worked. My eyes would drift back to that photograph. One evening I invited a friend over for dinner. I didn't mention the photo to him right away. I wanted to see if he noticed anything. After we ate, we sat in the living room. He was talking about his job and I was only half listening. I watched him glance at the wall. He stopped talking mid-sentence and squinted. He got up and walked over to the frame. He leaned in, studying it. He asked me where I got the weird picture. I just nodded, waiting for him to say more. He seemed puzzled by the shapes in the windows. He asked if it was some kind of art project that changed under different lighting. I could see the confusion on his face. I felt relieved that someone else saw it too. I wasn't alone in this, but that relief only lasted a second, because now I knew it wasn't just my imagination. I told him the whole story, starting from the auction. He listened without interrupting, but I could tell he was uneasy. He suggested I try taking the photo down and locking it away in a closet. I nodded. I grabbed it off the wall and placed it face down on the coffee table. Then we tried to watch a movie. The entire time I couldn't focus on anything except the photo that was sitting just a few feet away. By the end of the night my friend left and I put the photograph inside a box in my storage room. I felt tension in my shoulders, but at least it was out of sight. I tried to sleep, hoping that would solve everything. The next morning I woke up early. I felt compelled to check on it. I told myself it was just curiosity. I walked to the storage room and opened the box. The photograph was still there. I lifted it and turned it around. The house was the same, but the shadows on the lawn looked bigger, like they had moved closer to the foreground. I felt my hand shaking, so I put it back in the box. I slammed the door and left for work. All day I felt an uncomfortable itch in the back of my mind. I couldn't stay away from it. When I came home, I opened the storage room again and pulled the photograph out. I placed it on the coffee table and stared. The shadows were now on the porch. I leaned in, heart pounding. My pulse throbbed in my neck. I thought I could see the faint shape of a head, maybe a shoulder. It was so dark that I Wasn't sure, but I got the strong impression there were people in that photo. I wanted to throw it away, but something stopped me. I can't explain it. It was like I was drawn to it and repelled by it at the same time. I told myself I needed to keep track of the changes. I grabbed a notepad and started writing down what I saw day by day. I documented any new details. On Wednesday, I noticed that one of the doors on the porch was now halfway open. On Thursday, I saw a second figure standing near the edge of the grass wearing something that looked like a long coat. On Friday, a light appeared in what I guessed was the foyer. These changes kept piling up and I felt more and more on edge. My nights were restless. Every little noise in my house made me jump. I kept looking over at the photograph, half expecting the figures to walk right out of it. One night I was sitting on my couch flipping through a magazine, trying to distract myself. My living room was quiet with only a lamp by my recliner turned on. The photograph lay face down on the coffee table. Because I couldn't bear to see it, suddenly I heard a scraping sound. It was loud, but it came from the direction of the coffee table. I felt a sharp jolt in my chest. My skin went cold. I slowly placed the magazine down and got to my feet. My legs felt weak. I moved closer to the coffee table. The photograph was in the same position, but the box behind it had shifted an inch or two. I stared at it. I couldn't figure out how that box moved. There was no draft and nothing else was disturbed. My heart hammered. My mind raced. I lifted the frame and turned it over. Now the front door in the picture was wide open. There was a person standing on the threshold. The figure was clearer than any of the others. I saw broad shoulders, short hair, and a familiar outline. It looked like me. My stomach felt like it had dropped to the floor. I gasped, covering my mouth with one hand. I set the photo down and backed away. My arms were shaking and my head SPF. It was me, or something that looked exactly like me, right at the entrance to that house. I had no idea how that could even happen. My eyes stung from not blinking. I rubbed my face and paced around the room. My breath came in short bursts. I wanted to scream or do something to break this tension. I picked up my phone and dialed my friend, the same one who'd been over for dinner. He didn't answer. I left a message, my voice trembling. I just said I needed him to call me back. Then I stared at the photo again. The figure hadn't moved. It just stood there facing out. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept the photo on the coffee table facing up as if I needed to watch it. I sat on my couch with every light in the room turned on. My body felt exhausted, but my mind refused to rest. Around 2 a.m. I started to nod off. Then I heard a soft tapping sound. It was gentle, like knuckles on glass. I jolted awake and looked around. My heart pounded. I realized the sound seemed to be coming from the photograph. I stood up on shaky legs and peered closer. The glass over the picture looked undisturbed. I tapped it with my finger and it made a dull thud. There was no second tap, but I swear I heard it. My hands were clammy. My t-shirt stuck to my back. I felt like I was in a place I didn't recognize, even though it was my own living room. The next day I called in sick to work. I couldn't function. My mind was completely occupied with this bizarre situation. I spent the morning trying to research the photograph or the house it showed. I scoured the internet searching for any detail. I tried words like old mansion, haunted photograph, and the name of the auction house. I found nothing that looked like the house in my picture. Eventually I gave up and walked back to my living room. The sun was shining through the curtains, giving the space a warm glow. The photograph, though, seemed darker. The sky in the background looked stormy now, with clouds forming around the roof that wasn't there before. My reflection in the glass looked pale and drawn. The figure that resembled me was still at the front door, but now it appeared to be stepping off the porch onto the grass. My chest tightened. My hands felt numb. I rested a hand on the back of the couch to steady myself. I thought about tossing the photo into a fire pit or smashing it, but some instinct warned me against that. I can't explain why. It felt like if I destroyed it, I'd be inviting something worse. The changes were slow, almost subtle, but every day the tension in me grew stronger. I found myself checking the photograph every hour as if I needed to track the progress of that figure. I walked around my house looking behind doors, checking windows, half expecting to see my doppelganger outside. By late afternoon, I noticed the figure in the photo was now in the yard. I could see my face more clearly. The eyes were blank, like there was no expression. The lips were slightly parted, the head tilted up, staring at whoever was looking at the picture. My throat felt tight. I thought about the possibility that it was trying to get out. I pictured it stepping out of the photo and appearing in my living room. My pulse raced, my ears rang. I locked every door in my house. I felt foolish doing that, but I couldn't help it. I wanted a barrier, even if it was just a door lock. As evening fell, I sat on the couch staring at the photograph. The sky in it was almost black now, like nighttime. The porch lights were on, and I could see more shadows around the yard. The figure that resembled me was closer to the lower edge of the frame, as though it was about to step beyond the boundary of the picture. I shivered, rubbing my arms. The silence in my house weighed on me. My breathing was shallow. I kept my phone in my hand, ready to call my friend again. I was too scared to be alone, but he hadn't responded to my earlier message. I glanced at the time. It was past 9. I forced myself to eat something just to keep my energy up, but I barely tasted the food. I felt a strong urge to put the photograph away again, but I also felt compelled to watch it. Each time I looked at it, my heart pounded. Each time I looked away, my mind raced with thoughts of what might be happening in it. I paced the room for hours. Eventually, close to midnight, I turned off the main lights and only left a small lamp on. I sat near the coffee table, the photograph just a foot away from me. The air felt heavy, my shoulders were tense, my eyes kept shifting between the photo and my surroundings. I noticed every creak in the house, every shift of the wood floor. At around 1 in the morning, I realized the figure's foot was halfway out of the bottom edge of the frame. I couldn't breathe for a moment. I leaned forward, my heart racing. I felt sweat trickle down my temple. My hand shook. I reached out and touched the glass, pressing my fingertips against it. It felt solid and cool, but the figure in the image was almost out of view. I sat back, clenching my fists. My mind flashed with the idea that any second something could appear in my peripheral vision. I whipped my head around, expecting to see a shape in the dark corners of my house, but there was nothing. I was alone now. It's well past midnight, and I'm writing this down because I need to focus on something. The photograph is on the table facing me. The figure is almost completely gone from the scene. The rest of the yard still shows the other shadows, and the house windows are lit. My pulse is thawing in my ears. My mouth is dry. I keep looking at my front door, half expecting to hear a knock or see the handle turn. I feel alert and terrified. I can hear my heartbeat. My entire body feels tense, like I'm bracing for something. I'm afraid that whatever is inside that photograph is trying to reach me. I'm afraid I won't be able to stop it. My body feels worn out from this stress, but I can't bring myself to turn away now. I'm keeping my eyes on the picture. If I see movement, I'll try to react. I don't know if I can do anything, but I need to be ready. That's where I am right now. I'm sitting here writing, hoping that talking about it will make me feel less alone. I can't explain how a photograph can change like this, or how it can contain a figure that looks just like me. All I know is that it does, and that figure is almost out of the frame. I'm watching every inch of I'm watching my front door, I'm waiting, and I'm praying nothing happens, even though I'm pretty sure it will. I have no one to call who would believe me. I'm trapped in this strange vigil, listening to every little sound, checking every shadow on the walls. My eyes are stinging from strain, but I can't blink for more than a second, and every time I do, I worry that when I look back that figure might be standing right in front of me. I bought my vacation property about 6 months ago. At first I felt excited about the open land, the quiet nights, and the chance to walk in the nearby forest whenever I wanted. I didn't bother with official trails. Most of the time I preferred to wander. I heard the wind rustle the branches. I heard something like a soft sigh. I didn't hear my name again. I shrugged it off. I figured it was just the breeze. I kept walking for another 15 minutes. I felt fine apart from that small trace of discomfort in the back of my head. I took deep breaths, enjoying the scent of wet earth. I decided I'd had enough for the morning, so I turned back. Everything seemed normal. The next day I noticed I kept looking over my shoulder. It was the 8th day of my stay, and I felt nervous for no specific reason. My stomach was a bit unsettled. I tried to read a book on the back porch, but I found myself getting restless. I put the book aside, stood up, and looked out at the trees. I decided I should go for another walk, hoping it would calm me down. As I walked into the forest, I tried to relax my shoulders and breathe slower. After a while I heard it again. This time it was clearer. It sounded like someone whispering my name in a low, drawn-out tone. My scalp tingled, my throat tightened. I turned around. No one was there. I stood there for a few seconds, then the whisper came again. It was coming from deeper in the forest. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind, but it didn't sound random. It sounded like a person or something trying to get my attention. My heart pounded. My palms started sweating. Still, I felt a strange pull. I told myself I was imagining things, but I couldn't ignore it. I walked further in, passing through thicker undergrowth. The air felt colder. My jacket didn't seem to help. I heard the voice again, always faint, always right on the edge of hearing. I noticed the way the light dimmed under the canopy. I felt a chill across my neck. My back muscles tensed. I kept moving forward, pushing branches aside with my forearm. At some point I stumbled upon a trail that looked old and unused. It wasn't marked or anything. It looked overgrown, and I saw patches of moss on rocks at the edges. The whisper got louder. I felt my heartbeat in my chest and in my ears. I followed that trail for maybe 10 or 15 minutes. It was easy to lose track of time. I wasn't thinking about anything else. I just wanted to find out what was calling me. I didn't see any people. I didn't see wildlife either. Everything seemed too quiet. I heard the crunch of my steps. I heard my own breathing, shallow and tense. Then I came upon a clearing. At the center I saw a circle of stones about 2 feet high, all arranged in a perfect ring. Each stone had green moss creeping over it. Some had old markings that looked like carvings. I don't know what they meant. I could see grooves and lines, but I couldn't read any of it. My stomach twisted into knots. The whispers stopped the moment I stepped inside the clearing. I stood there looking around. The trees surrounding the clearing were tall, and their branches seemed to block out most of the sky. The area felt colder. I could see my breath forming faint clouds in the air. I didn't like the silence. It felt heavy. I felt as if the clearing was sealed off from the outside world. My heart beat against my chest. My skin prickled. I approached the circle. My boots sank into the soft, wet ground. I bent down and touched one of the stones. The surface was damp and rough. I ran my finger along one of the carved lines. It felt sharp at the edges. I looked over my shoulder. I didn't see anyone, but I sensed eyes on me. A branch snapped somewhere behind me. I spun around, fists clenched. Nothing there. I stood perfectly still. My breath came in short bursts. My pulse drummed in my ears. I felt a twitch in my left eye, then I heard a soft rustle, almost like cloth dragging across the ground. I turned again. I saw nothing, but the hair on my arm stood up. My forehead felt clammy. I backed away from the circle of stones, never turning my back on the clearing. My feet stumbled on roots, but I managed to stay upright. I felt like I had to leave. I mumbled something like, "I don't belong here," under my breath. My voice sounded shaky even to me. I rushed out of the clearing, following the trail in reverse. The cold air pressed against my face. I could feel sweat dripping down my temples. I glanced over my shoulder. Every few steps the trees loomed on each side. The wind picked up a bit and the branches made creaking sounds overhead. Eventually I broke back into a more familiar part of the forest. I recognized the fallen log near the small stream I liked to follow. I kept going until I reached the backyard of my property. When I stepped onto my porch, I let out a long breath. I felt my shoulders relax for the first time in an hour. My chest still hurt from the tension that night. I had trouble sleeping each time I closed my eyes. I pictured the circle of stones and those strange carvings. I remembered the heavy quiet of that spot. I tossed and turned. My mouth felt dry. I heard night insects outside, but their sounds kept making me jump. I even turned on a small lamp in the living room and dozed off on the couch, hoping I'd get some rest. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke up covered in sweat with my heart pounding. I thought I heard my name again, whispering from the darkness. I stared at the corners of the room for a minute until I realized I was alone. I forced myself to go back to bed, but my sleep stayed restless over the next few days. I tried to ignore what happened. I spent time fixing small things around the house, like a loose cabinet door and a squeaky floorboard. I mowed the small patch of grass in the front yard. I tried to keep my mind occupied, but I never felt comfortable. Every time I looked at the line of trees behind the house, I felt a pit in my stomach. It felt like someone or something was calling me again, even if I couldn't hear it directly. My nerves were always on edge. My appetite dropped. I caught myself losing track of time, just staring out the window. On the 10th day, I decided I couldn't let this fear get to me. I put on sturdy boots, grabbed a flashlight even though it was midday, and headed into the forest. I stayed on the regular path. At first the ground was firm and the air smelled like pine needles. I heard a few birds chirping. I felt a little calmer, but once I moved deeper the air got colder again. I saw the faint trail that led to the stone circle. I hesitated. A dull ache started in my chest. I told myself I'd only check it out during the day just to see if there was some logical explanation for those stones. Maybe they were just old boundary markers or some local landmark. My rational mind wanted to find a reasonable answer. When I arrived at the clearing, I saw the circle again, exactly as before. The moss looked thicker than I remembered. The carvings looked the same. The place was silent. I walked around the perimeter. My boots made soft crunches on the ground. I noticed a few small stones scattered around, half buried. I picked one up. It was smooth with a strange groove. I set it down. Then I felt like I was being watched again. I turned quickly. My heart that no one stood there, but I sensed a presence. My throat felt dry. My hands trembled a little. I took a step back. I spoke out loud, just a single word, "Hello." My voice sounded weak. I heard nothing. My ears rang. The tension in my neck felt painful. I took a few more steps around the stones. I noticed a faint odor like damp leaves mixed with something metallic. I felt my stomach churn. I clicked on my flashlight even though there was plenty of daytime light. I pointed the beam at the carvings, trying to see them better. They looked like spirals and crisscross lines, nothing that I recognized. As I moved the flashlight, a shadow flickered in the corner of my eye. I snapped my head to the side, but saw nothing but tree trunks. A surge of fear tightened my chest. I switched off the flashlight and stood there listening to my own breathing. After a few minutes I couldn't take it anymore. I left the clearing. I kept a brisk pace, almost jogging along the path. My legs felt shaky, my lungs burned, my mind raced. I returned to the house and locked the doors. Even though it was daytime, I stood in the living room panting. I felt sweat gathering under my shirt. My hands shook as I poured myself some water. I gulped it down. I tried to calm myself by turning on the TV, but I couldn't focus on anything that even I tried to read a local hiking guide I had found in the house. I looked for any reference to old stone circles, ancient carvings, or anything like that. I found nothing. The guide just listed well-known trails and a few scenic spots, no mention of anything hidden. I felt frustrated and anxious. My headache returned and my ears felt pressurized. I walked over to the window and stared into the darkness. The forest felt alive. I stood there waiting to see if any lights or movement caught my eye. I thought I saw a flicker, but it might have been my imagination. My pulse raced. I stepped back from the window. The next morning I forced myself to eat some breakfast, eggs and toast. I was tired of feeling so on edge. I decided to go for a final walk just to see if things had changed. I needed to prove to myself that this was just in my head. Around noon I headed out again, sticking to the more open parts of the forest. I tried to focus on the feel of the bark. When I touched a tree, I tried to listen to actual birds and the real sound of the wind, telling myself there was nothing else there. Still, every time I walked, I sensed something off behind me. When I turned, I saw only trunks, branches, and patches of light on the ground, but I felt a chill raced down my spine. My arms and legs felt tense. My stomach flipped. I didn't hear the whisper at that time, but I felt a presence. It was like having eyes on the back of my head. My breathing grew shallow. My legs felt stiff. I hurried back home. By the time I reached my yard, my heart hammered so hard I could feel the pulses in my wrists. I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes for a moment. My throat burned from breathing so hard. Since then I can't walk through the forest without that same feeling. My skin feels cold, like the temperature drops by 10 degrees as soon as I step under the branches. My eyes dart around searching for movement. I hear faint rustling footsteps or breathing. Sometimes I smell that damp metallic odor again. My entire body tenses, my ears ring, my mouth goes dry. I try to push forward, telling myself it's just the environment, maybe my nerves, but the fear doesn't leave. Back at the house, I keep the windows locked at night. I sit on the couch listening for any sounds outside. Sometimes I hear branches scraping against the roof or the wind knocking against a shutter. It always makes my heart skip a beat. I can't see anything in the darkness, but I feel like something's moving out there. I feel pinned by an unseen stare. When I wake up in the morning, I feel relief for a split second until I remember where I am. I don't have any logical explanation. I haven't found any sign of people messing with me. I haven't found any local legends about that circle of stones. I've considered leaving early, but I put my savings into this place. It's supposed to be my retreat. Instead, it's turning into something else every time I step into the forest. Now I feel followed. I feel a chill up my back. I feel my nerves tighten. I know I'm not imagining it, but I can't prove otherwise. All I can do is keep my guard up and try not to let it drive me out. So far I'm still here. I still walk the woods some mornings, looking over my shoulder. Every few steps I listen for whispers. I glance at the trees waiting for movement. My heart pounds and sometimes I break into a sweat, but I keep going because part of me wants to see if it ever ends. Part of me hopes that maybe it's all just nerves. Part of me wonders if something else is really out there, hidden among the mossy stones and the silent branches, waiting for me to come closer again. And that's my story of this place. So far it's tense, it's unsettling, but it's mine, and for now I'm not leaving. I froze last night when I heard a soft creak outside my bedroom door. My heart started pounding so hard I thought my chest might burst. There was no one else in the house. I had locked every window and door, still the sound kept echoing in the hallway, one step at a time, like slow, deliberate footsteps moving closer. That's why I'm telling this now. I need to get it off my chest. I can't keep ignoring the fact that something is wrong with the second floor of my new place. I moved into this small townhouse a few weeks ago. It's in a quiet neighborhood with mostly older people. I like the location because it's near my work and the rent is within my budget. The house is narrow with a cramped living room, a small kitchen and a staircase leading up to 2 bedrooms on the second floor. It seemed perfect for me. I don't have a lot of stuff and I plan to use the second bedroom as a small office or storage area. It felt good to have a place of my own. The first few days were fine. I unpacked my boxes and arranged my furniture. I hung a few pictures on the walls. Nothing strange happened during the daytime. The corridor on the second floor is short. It runs maybe 10 feet from the top of the stairs to the door of my main bedroom. On the left is a bathroom and on the right is the second bedroom. It felt normal at first. I measured it by walking from the staircase to my room. It took about 5 steps. Depending on whether I counted that first half step. When I came off the last stair, I remember thinking the place was cozy. About a week into living here, I started noticing something off at night. I would leave my room to go to the bathroom in the dark and realize it took more steps than usual to reach the door. I thought I was just tired. The next night it happened again and I got a weird chill across my neck. It felt like the air was denser, like there was a faint vibration in the floor. I would return to my bedroom and lock the door, telling myself that I was imagining things. I tried to ignore the feeling, but it kept growing. On the 8th or 9th day, I decided to test my impressions. I waited until dark, around 11 p.m. Then I turned off every light upstairs. I stood at the top of the stairs and counted my steps out loud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I expected my bedroom door to be right there. It wasn't. I reached out in the dark, groping for the door knob, but only touched empty air. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but it got faster. I took 2 more steps and finally felt the doorknob brush against my fingertips. I pushed the door open and shut it behind me. I remembered that earlier in the day it only took 5 steps. Now it took 7. That was the moment I realized I wasn't imagining anything. I started checking the hallway every morning, counting my steps in the daylight. It was always 5. The distance never changed. It stayed consistent. The bathroom door, the second bedroom door, and the main bedroom door were all where they should be. But when the sun went down, something shifted. At night, the corridor stretched itself. Sometimes it became 7 steps, sometimes 8. It never went beyond 8, but that was enough to make me uneasy. I noticed the doors seemed to move around as well. On some nights the bathroom door was closer to the top of the stairs than usual. On other nights it was further away. I tried turning on all the lights at night, hoping it would fix the problem. That first attempt was on a Friday after I came home late from work. I switched on the overhead light in the hallway plus the lamps in both bedrooms. Everything looked normal under the bright bulbs. I counted 5 steps to my room, same as during the day. I actually laughed a little, thinking I had just been scaring myself in the dark. I turned off the lights in the other bedroom and the hallway and stepped out for a test. The moment the lights went out, I felt that thick air again. I couldn't see, but I sensed the corridor exp standing in front of me. My mouth got dry and my stomach churned. I reached forward, hoping to touch the wall. My fingertips brushed the wallpaper, but something felt off about the texture. It was still the same floral pattern, but it seemed warmer than normal. I pulled my hand away and walked forward. This time it took 6 steps to reach my door. I rushed inside and locked it. The next few nights I tried to ignore the problem. I stayed in my bedroom after dark, only venturing out when I absolutely had to. If I needed to use the bathroom, I turned on all the lights before stepping into the hallway. Usually that helped me get there in 5 steps, but once I turned the lights off, I could feel the corridor shift again. I told myself it was stress or some trick of my imagination, but that explanation stopped making sense when I heard the footsteps behind me. It started about 3 days ago. I was halfway to my bedroom door, counting my steps in a quiet whisper when the floor behind me creaked. My heart thumped. I turned around, flipping on my phone's flashlight, but I saw nothing. The hallway was empty. There was only the closed door of the second bedroom and the staircase behind it. I heard a second creak closer. This time I spun around again, aiming my light in every direction. Still nothing, but the air felt charged. My arms got goosebumps. I heard my own breathing going fast. I grabbed my bedroom door knob and yanked the door open. Then I slammed it shut and leaned against it. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get a full breath. I remember sliding down onto the floor, staring at the bottom of the door. I felt sure that something was on the other side waiting. I tried to sleep that night, but every time I closed my eyes, I heard the same light creaking in the hallway. It sounded like small steps pacing back and forth. I stuffed earplugs in my ears and pulled a blanket over my head. Eventually I drifted off for a couple of hours. The next morning I walked into the corridor. In daylight everything was normal. The distance between the doors was the same as always, and the floor didn't make any unusual noises. I told myself I was just anxious and tired, but the feeling stayed with me all day. That evening I decided to test the length of the corridor again. I turned off the upstairs lights and stood near the top of the stairs, phone flashlight in hand. I pointed the beam at the floor and started walking. I tried to stay calm. The corridor felt longer right away. I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The corridor just went on. I aimed the light forward and I saw my bedroom door, but it seemed far away. The door to the second bedroom was now behind me on the left. Normally it should be on my right if I'm facing my bedroom door. That made my stomach twist. I turned my head quickly to the right, expecting the bathroom door, but I only saw more hallway. My pulse started racing. I took another step and heard a floorboard creak behind me. I whipped around, shining the flashlight over the space empty. My throat felt tight. I took 3 more steps, keeping the light pointed forward. Finally I reached my bedroom door. After 9 steps I rushed inside, locked the door and sat on the edge of my bed. My hands were shaking. I stayed in my room for the rest of that night. I forced myself to sleep by watching some random videos on my phone until I dozed off. I kept waking up every couple of hours, listening to see if there were footsteps outside. Several times I heard light creaks and soft taps in the hallway. I didn't check. I just stayed in bed, pulled the blanket up to my ears and tried to think about anything else. The next morning I considered moving out. It crossed my mind that I might not be safe in this house, but I've invested money in this place. I can't just walk away from it. I tried calling an old friend, but I felt stupid explaining the situation. I ended up telling him that I was having trouble sleeping in my new house. I didn't get into the specifics. I just mentioned creaking floors and weird drafts. He suggested a few quick fixes like checking the insulation or having the floorboards tightened. I pretended I'd do that and ended the call. It didn't help. I spent most of the day pacing around downstairs, trying to gather the nerve to inspect the hallway in daylight. Around noon I went upstairs and walked the corridor. It was definitely 5 steps from the stairs to my bedroom door. Everything looked normal. I opened the second bedroom door, checked inside, saw the same bare walls and the stack of boxes I hadn't unpacked yet. Then I opened the bathroom door, saw the sink and tub, nothing out of place. I leaned down and pressed on the floorboards. They creaked a bit, but not in any unusual way. I thought about sleeping somewhere else that night, maybe a cheap hotel, but I decided to stay because I couldn't find it. My hand brushed against a wall, but there was no door frame. I panicked. I moved my hand along the surface, feeling for the doorknob. I found nothing. I took another step forward. The floor creaked behind me again, and I let out a shaky breath. I felt sweat drip down my forehead. I heard another creak, then another, like someone was walking in time with me, matching my steps. My stomach clenched and my chest felt tight. I turned back toward my bedroom. Even though I couldn't see it, I reached out for the wall, feeling my way along. My fingertips slid across the wallpaper, and I moved as quickly as I dared. After 3 steps, I realized I had no idea where I was. The hallway seemed to shift around me. I kept walking, each footstep making a hollow sound on the floorboards. There was a steady series of creaks behind me, like they were echoing my movements. After what felt like 2 or 3 minutes, my hand finally knocked against the edge of a door. I grabbed the knob and turned it. Relief hit me when I realized it was my bedroom door. I stumbled inside, slammed it shut, and locked it. My chest rose and fell with frantic breaths. I stood there in the darkness, leaning against my door, sweating. I felt my throat go dry. My hand shook. I forced myself to breathe slowly until I calmed down enough to move. I flipped the bedroom light switch. It worked. I sat on my bed, my heart still hammering. I decided right then that I wouldn't leave my room after dark anymore. I can't handle the shifting corridor. I can't deal with the footsteps that always seem to follow me. I've accepted that the hallway is different at night. I don't know why, I don't know how, but I believe it's getting worse. That's where I am now. It's after midnight and I'm sitting on my bed staring at the door. I feel like the corridor is getting longer each night. When the sun is out, I can walk it in 5 steps. When it's dark, it might take 8, 9 or more, and the doors move around like they have a mind of their own. I can't explain it to anyone without sounding crazy, so I just stay in here, hoping that if I don't cross that threshold in the dark, I'll be safe. I'm afraid that if I leave my room and step into that hallway again at night, I might not find my way back. I might wander around in the darkness, hearing those footsteps behind me, chasing me until I can't breathe. I've started considering ways to avoid the problem. I keep water in my room and some snacks so I don't have to leave if I get hungry or thirsty at night. I've even been thinking about a portable toilet solution just to avoid opening that door. This is my life now. I hate it, but I don't see another option. Maybe eventually I'll move, but right now I feel stuck. I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm just trying to share what's been happening. I hope that putting it into words will help me face it somehow, but if I'm being honest, I don't think it will. The corridor isn't normal and I can't pretend otherwise. At least in daylight it's quiet and I can walk around without getting lost, but once the sun goes down that space changes. It's alive somehow and it doesn't want me there, so I stay in my bedroom alone waiting for the morning. I hope that's enough to keep me safe. I hope one day I'll work up the courage to leave this place for good. Until then, I'm stuck here listening to those faint creaks, dreading the moment I hear them just outside my door. I found the script in a trunk that my grandfather left me, and I thought it was just some old piece of junk. I was wrong. My name is Victor. I'm an amateur actor who usually takes any chance to perform, even in small community theaters or tiny shows in basements. I love the thrill of standing on a stage. I enjoy the sound of my own voice when I get a script that fits me. I like trying on different roles, but this script was different from anything I've ever touched. It happened about 3 weeks ago when I opened an old wooden trunk in my grandfather's attic. I expected some clothes, maybe a few photos. Instead, I found a dusty manuscript bound with a rough string. There was no title page. The first lines had a strange symbol in black ink that looked like some kind of twisted circle. I started reading right there in the attic, holding a flashlight and breathing in stale air. The text felt odd as I went through it. It referred to ancient beings, dark rituals, and a bizarre chant that repeated throughout the script. I can't remember when I decided to take it home, but I did. At first I thought it was just some obscure play that never got published or performed. I figured it might be a neat challenge to memorize those lines and maybe even adapt them for a small production, so I took it to my apartment. My place is just 2 rooms and a small bathroom. It's usually quiet with the faint hum of my fridge in the kitchen. That night I sat in my living room, turned on a single lamp and started reading the lines out loud. My first read through was uneventful. I stumbled over words because the dialogue was weird. The names of these ancient entities didn't roll off my tongue. The lines were short, but they had this heavy feel. By the time I was done with the first act, I felt a chill on my arms. It wasn't cold in the room, so I told myself I was just spooked by the script's strange vibe. I closed it, put it aside, and turned on the TV to clear near my head. The next day I woke up and saw the script on my coffee table. I thought about tossing it, but something tugged at me. I felt a weird urge to pick it up again. I had the morning off, so I decided to practice a bit. I stood in front of my mirror and started to say the lines. The mirror is on the closet door in my bedroom, and I positioned myself so I could watch my expressions. The script's lines were intense. They described an ancient force that demands respect and fear. There was a part where the main character says something like, "I call upon you and open my mind to your presence." I paused after speaking those words because I heard a noise from the hallway. It sounded like a door closing on its own. I stopped and listened. My heart pounded in my chest. The hallway was empty. No windows were open, but I swear I heard that door move. I walked out, checking each door. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, but it might have been that way before. I tried to laugh it off and went back to my room, but my pulse stayed high for the rest of the morning. I spent the next few days balancing my day job with rehearsals. Even though I had no plan to perform this script for anyone, I kept going over the lines. It felt like I needed to get them right every time I picked it up. My palms got sweaty. I forced myself to stand, hold the pages in front of me, and say the lines out loud. At times I felt like someone was behind me watching. Other times I heard something like soft chain links rattling in the next room. I told myself it was just my building's plumbing or maybe a neighbor shifting furniture, but it always happened when I repeated the same section of the script. The part about summoning something I didn't understand. During one rehearsal, I was halfway through the second act. There's a monologue that references forbidden rituals. The main character is supposed to describe the steps needed to open a gateway. I got to the words, "I prepare the circle and offer my voice," and a loud bang came from the kitchen. It made me jump. I dashed in, half expecting someone standing there. I found my kitchen chair tipped over on the floor. I checked around, but no one else was in the apartment. The front door was locked. I had no explanation, so I just stood the chair back up. My hand shook and a cold sweat formed on my forehead. I told myself I'd had enough for the night. A few nights later, I decided to do a deeper rehearsal in my living room. I liked the bigger space, and I wanted to walk around while delivering my lines. I started with the first act again, working my way through each scene. I kept glancing toward the hallway because I had that feeling of being watched. Every step I took, the floor creaked under me. I tried to stay focused, but my voice trembled. I spoke the lines about appeasing the ancient watches about, bending my will to theirs. Suddenly the overhead light flickered. It didn't go out all the way, just dimmed for a second. My heart felt like it skipped a beat. I took a deep breath and forced myself to continue. As I moved into the last lines of that act, I felt a cold draft on my neck. It was like someone was standing right behind me, blowing cold air on my skin. I spun around. The windows were shut, the balcony door was locked, no vents were near me, but that cold sensation lingered. I said out loud, "This is just in my head." I waited, hoping the feeling would go away. Instead it got stronger. My teeth started chattering. I put the script down and went to the bathroom to splash water on my face. That water felt warmer than usual on my cold skin. I stared at my reflection. My eyes looked tired and my cheeks were pale. I told myself I would take a break from rehearsing the next day. At work, I kept thinking about the script. I could hardly concentrate on anything. It felt like it was calling me. My boss asked if I was feeling okay, and I just nodded. All I could picture was the next set of lines I hadn't rehearsed yet. Around lunchtime I drove home. Even though I usually stay at the office, I went straight to my apartment, closed the curtains and pulled out the script. My heart raced as I opened it. The pages smelled damp. I had a slight headache, but I started reading the third act anyway. The third act was darker than the first two. It detailed a final chant, something that the main character has to deliver in a loud, commanding voice. I said a few words and the power flickered. I remember stepping back, feeling my hair stand on end. I realized I was breathing hard. My chest felt tight. I pushed forward, repeating the lines. The building creaked around me. It sounded like footsteps above me, but I live on the top floor. I tried to ignore it. My throat felt dry. I grabbed a glass of water and took a swig, then kept going. That's when I heard a faint sound of chains scraping across the floor in the hallway. It got louder. I put the script down and slowly walked to the hallway. Nothing was there, but the noise continued until I said, "I'm done for now." Then it stopped. At that point I started losing sleep. Every time I lay in bed I kept hearing the lines from the script repeating in my head. My mind wouldn't shut off. I got out of bed and paced around the living room, feeling an invisible weight on my shoulders. I realized I was talking to myself, repeating those weird lines without even holding the script. It was like they were burned into my memory. A week passed and I decided I needed to do a full run through. I didn't know why, but I couldn't fight the urge. I wanted to see if finishing the entire play would bring me peace. So one evening I set up my living room like a stage. I moved the coffee table aside, turned the lights down and placed a chair in the corner. I took a deep breath and started from the very first line. My voice was shaky at first, but then I slipped into the character's mindset. During the first act, the overhead light flickered again. I heard faint knocking sounds from the walls. My mouth felt dry. I powered through the lines. I let my voice fill the room, ignoring the echo of something that sounded like it was scraping along the baseboards. When I reached the second act, the cold draft returned. This time it circled me like a current of air moving around in a loop. I could feel goosebumps rising on my arms. My breath came out in shaky bursts. I kept speaking though my ears felt blocked, like I was underwater. My fingertips tingled. I saw the shadows on the wall shift, but I had no direct source of moving light. As I approached the final act, my head pounded. I could feel my heart thawing and my eyes burned from not blinking enough. I kept forgetting to breathe properly. I mumbled a line, then repeated it louder. I heard a crash in the kitchen. I didn't stop. I forced the words out. I could taste something metallic in my mouth, but I pushed through. The last few lines described a final invocation. I heard my own voice echo in the apartment. My lips trembled, but the words came out. As I reached the last line, my legs felt weak. I steadied myself by gripping the back of the chair. My voice turned hoarse, but I got the sentence out. I opened the path and surrendered to the watcher's right. Then a sudden gust of cold wind swept through the room. My curtains flew upward and the lamp flickered. I stumbled back, my teeth clamped tight as the cold cut into my skin. I swear I heard whispering like dozens of voices at once. I couldn't make out the words, but it felt like the entire space was filled with them. That's when I noticed the mirror in the corner of the room. Usually it just shows my reflection, but this time I saw faces. They were pale with hollow eyes, rows of silent onlookers staring at me from behind the glass. It looked like a whole audience crammed into that mirror. My stomach twisted and I felt an urge to vomit. I turned away, but I could still feel them on me, like their gaze was pressing down on my shoulders. I tried to move, but my legs felt numb. My hands shook so badly that I dropped the script. Pages scattered across the floor. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. My mouth just hung open. The whispering continued, growing louder. It seemed to fill my entire apartment, bouncing off the walls, making my ears ring. The cold wind rushed past me again, rattling the chairs and making the lamp swing. My breath was short. I hunched forward, my spine tingling with sharp jolts that felt like electric shocks. I glanced at the mirror again. The faces were closer there. Lips didn't move yet. I heard them whisper. I couldn't look away. It felt like a magnet pulling my eyes toward them. I managed to step back, pressing myself against the wall. The sound of my heart hammered in my ears. I felt sweat drip down my face, but it turned cold as soon as it formed. My clothes stuck to my body. I forced myself to close my eyes and breathe in. When I opened them, the mirror was empty. It was just my reflection looking terrified. I heard my own ragged breathing echo around me. For a moment everything was still. The lamp stopped swinging and the curtain settled. The temperature slowly rose. I wiped my forehead with the back of my hand. My legs still wobbled, but I tried to calm myself. I looked around the living room. The pages of the script were all over the floor. The chair was knocked sideways and a few items from my shelves had fallen. That sense of someone standing next to me was stronger than ever, though I felt a presence at my side, just out of sight. I tried to leave the room, but I didn't make it far. Every step felt heavy. I kept expecting something to grab me from behind. When I reached the door, I realized I wasn't sure if I should run outside or not. I didn't want to bring this feeling out into the hallway. It was like I feared that stepping out would spread it to the rest of the building. I stood there, hand on the doorknob, trying to steady my breathing. My eyes darted around, looking for any sign of movement. Nothing moved, but I sensed I wasn't alone. My own body felt weighed down, like someone placed a heavy coat on me. The air smelled stale, and I could taste my own fear bitter on my tongue. I tried to speak again, to say something, anything. My throat felt raw. After a moment I managed to form words. "I'm done," I whispered. I waited, listening to see if the whispering would start again. The silence felt thick and heavy. I could still hear my heart pounding. I left the living room and walked to the bathroom. I locked the door behind me. My hand shook as I turned on the faucet and watched water run over my fingers. I splashed my face and stared in the mirror above the sink. My reflection looked pale and sweaty. My hair stuck to my forehead. My eyes were wide. I breathed in and out, focusing on the feeling of water dripping off my chin. I stood there for a long time, waiting for the fear to subside. Eventually my heartbeat slowed a bit and I felt the chills fade, but the room still felt occupied. I couldn't ignore that tension in the air. I pressed my back against the bathroom door and slid down to the floor, hugging my knees. I felt tears burning my eyes, but I forced them back. I'm not sure how many minutes passed when I stood up again. My legs still felt weak, but I managed to open the door. The apartment was quiet. The pages of the script were still scattered on the living room floor. The lamp was still on, casting a warm glow. I didn't see any shadows moving or hear any chains rattling, but the sense of being watched hadn't left. I walked over to the coffee table and picked up the pages one by one. My mind was spinning. I kept glancing around, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. I stacked the pages as best I could, then set them on the table. My instincts told me not to read them again. I stood there breathing hard, looking at the disheveled state of my apartment. My back HDHD from tension. My neck felt sore. The script was complete, every line spoken. I had finished the play, yet the presence in the room felt even stronger. It clung to me, making my skin crawl. I stared at the lamp, my arms hung at my sides, heavy and shaking. I finally forced my legs to move toward the bedroom. Each step felt like wading through thick air. I turned off the living room light and shut the door behind me. A soft draft blew past me in the hallway. My arms broke out in goosebumps again when I reached my bedroom. I didn't bother changing clothes. I just laid down on my bed, staring at the ceiling. The darkness made every sound sharper. The hum of the fridge was distant, but I heard it clearly. My breath sounded loud and uneven. I wondered if I'd ever feel alone again. I tried to close my eyes. Every time I did, I thought I saw shapes in the darkness or heard faint whispers near my ear. My body refused to relax. I kept replaying the final line in my head. I opened the path and surrendered to the watchers. I wish I hadn't said it, but I did, and now I don't think I'm alone even when there's no one else here. I can't explain it better than that. That's the simple truth. I still remember the moment I first saw the mirror. I was standing in my living room, staring at the thick bubble wrap around an odd-shaped package. It had shown up on my doorstep with no return address. I had no idea who sent it. When I tore off the paper and plastic, I found a tall Gothic mirror. Its frame was black and twisted, covered in carved skulls and strange symbols. The carvings were so detailed that they almost looked wet, like fresh ink. I felt an immediate chill, but I was also curious. I ran my fingers over the skull on the top of the frame. It felt rough, as if it had been carved out of real bone. I shrugged off the discomfort and decided to hang it in my bedroom. I'm a simple guy. I work during the day in a warehouse, and I like to come home, watch some TV, and maybe have a cold beer. I'm not into haunted stuff or collectibles, but I figured a mirror is just a mirror. It was a free decoration, right? I found a spot on the wall across from my bed. I used a few nails and a sturdy hook to mount it. I felt unsettled while doing it, almost like the mirror was heavier than it should have been. When I was done, I stepped back and looked at it. The surface was smooth, the reflection was clear. My own face stared back. I shrugged and got on with my evening. That night I brushed my teeth and glanced at the mirror on my way to bed. My reflection was there, perfectly normal. I turned off the lights and crawled under the sheets. I remember feeling a nagging sense of unease, but I forced myself to ignore it. I thought I was just creeped out by the frame's design. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. I had to get up around midnight to use the bathroom. I stumbled back into my bedroom, half asleep, and saw something odd when I passed the mirror. At first I thought I was seeing my reflection, but something was off. I flicked on the small lamp on my nightstand. My reflection stood there, but it felt like there was a short delay in its movement. When I tilted my head, I noticed it was tilting its head. A second later I blinked, then it matched my position exactly. I told myself I must be tired. I crawled back into bed and tried not to think about it. The next morning I got dressed and looked at the mirror again. I wanted to check if what I saw was real. I raised my hand. My reflection raised its hand too. That seemed normal. I stepped closer. My reflection stepped closer again. It felt normal. I let out a breath and decided I must have imagined everything the night before I went to work for a few days. The mirror didn't do anything strange, it was just there hanging on my wall with that disturbing frame. I'd catch myself staring at it sometimes, especially at night. I'd notice how the carved skull seemed to shift in the dim light, but I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I tried to move on. One night I was watching a late night show in my living room. I felt like getting a snack, so I headed to the kitchen. My bedroom door was open and the mirror was visible at an angle. I glanced into it from the hallway and I froze. My reflection was standing there, but it wasn't doing what I was doing. I was standing in the hallway, leaning slightly to see inside the bedroom, but in the mirror I saw myself straight on, facing forward, looking right at me. I wasn't moving, I was just standing in the middle of the reflection's version of my room, staring back. My stomach turned, my mouth went dry. I forced myself to step closer. The reflection stepped closer too, but it kept a cold stare fixed on me. I felt a rush of adrenaline, my heart pounded. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. I reached up to my face slowly and wiped some sweat off my forehead. In the mirror, my reflection did the same motion, but it was slower, more deliberate. His eyes didn't leave mine. I felt like something was pulling me toward the glass. I wanted to run, but I also needed to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. I forced my legs to move. I walked into the bedroom. The reflection followed me. Then, as soon as I stood right in front of it, everything went back to normal. I saw my face, sweaty and scared, but moving with me. I swallowed hard. My hands were shaking. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking about the reflection's eyes. They looked angry or maybe accusing. Whenever I closed my eyes, I pictured that cold stare. At one point I tried to distract myself with my phone, but I couldn't focus. I ended up leaving the TV on for background noise until morning. Over the next few days I tried to avoid looking in that mirror. I'd get dressed in the bathroom, or I'd only take a quick glance at my hair before leaving for work, but I couldn't ignore that there was something wrong with it. It felt like it was watching me. Sometimes when I was in the bedroom, I'd feel a pressure in the back of my head, like I was being observed. I'd turn around and I'd see that twisted gothic frame. My reflection would be normal, but I never felt comfortable. There was one night when I made the mistake of looking into it right before I went to bed. I saw my reflection leaning forward closer than I was actually standing. I felt goosebumps on my arms. I stepped back, but my reflection stayed closer to the glass. I could see the outline of its shoulders, like it was about to push through the surface. Then a blink later it snapped back to match my position. I let out a shaky breath. My chest felt tight. I turned off the light and crawled under the covers. My heart was racing for at least an hour before I finally dozed off. Another time I walked into my bedroom and saw that the mirror wasn't reflecting my room at all. Instead, it showed some dark space with walls that looked damp. The light in that scene was very dim, like a single torch or candle in the distance. I couldn't see a flame, just a faint flicker that cast odd shadows. The walls had a rough, uneven texture like stone blocks. I felt a chill. I actually pinched my arm to make sure I wasn't dreaming. I took a step toward the mirror. My feet felt heavy. My pulse thundered in my ears as I got closer. I thought I heard a distant echo, like a dripping sound or a faint shuffle of feet in a corridor. The air in my bedroom was still, but my arms prickled with sweat. Right when I got within a foot of the glass, the reflection snapped back to my normal room. It felt like someone had just pulled a curtain across a stage. I almost stumbled backward. My breaths were short and I had to sit on the edge of my bed to calm myself. I tried to distract myself with everyday things. After that, I'd go to work early and stay late. I'd come home and watch TV, or sometimes I'd just sit in the living room with the lights on, but I still had to walk past that mirror. Sometimes I'd see myself, other times I'd see that place, that crypt-like space. It never stayed long, but it was always enough to make my heart pound. I decided to call a friend of mine, Stephen. He's not an expert on the occult, but I thought he might know something about antique shops or weird artifacts. I told him about the mirror and the strange frame. I tried to keep my voice steady, but my hand shook the entire time I held the phone. He said he'd never heard of anything like that, but he told me to get rid of it if it was causing me stress. I thought about it. I even considered taking it out to the curb or smashing it, but every time I worked up the nerve to actually remove it from my wall, I felt a sick feeling in my stomach. It was like the mirror wouldn't let me. That sounds dramatic, but it's the best way I can describe it. My arms felt heavy whenever I thought about taking it down. My heart rate would spike and I'd get short of breath, so I kept putting it off. One evening I tried to cover the mirror with a blanket. I had an old blanket in my closet and I dragged it out. My palms were sweating as I stood there staring at the skulls and twisted designs in the frame. I tossed the blanket over the top edge for a moment. I felt some relief. I didn't have to see my reflection or that crypt anymore, but then I heard a soft scraping sound like someone dragging a fingernail over wood. I jerked back. The blanket slipped off the mirror, landing at my feet. I looked at the surface and I saw my reflection's eyes locked on me. I noticed a flicker of a grin like it was mocking my attempt. I felt my stomach churn. I left the mirror uncovered because I was scared of that scraping sound. I didn't try it again. Later that night I woke up sweating. I glanced at the mirror and saw my reflection. It was just standing there, but its mouth was curled into a strange smile. I wasn't smiling. I could feel my own lips pressed tight, yet in the glass I saw a slight grin. My heart pounded so hard that I could hear it in my ears. I turned on my bedside lamp, hoping that a little light would break the illusion. My reflection's face shifted to a neutral expression the second the lamp came on. I felt a wave of nausea, but I managed to stay still. I didn't want to get too close. I just stayed in bed staring at that version of me until my eyes got too heavy and I fell asleep again. The next few days were tense. I felt like a prisoner in my own apartment. I avoided my bedroom as much as possible, but I still had to sleep. Each night I'd see small changes in the reflection. Sometimes its eyes looked a little angrier, or it would tilt its head at a strange angle. Other times I'd catch glimpses of that dark crypt, as if the mirror's background was shifting even while my reflection was in the frame. I never heard voices or anything like that, but I sometimes heard those faint echoes like water dripping on stone. I started having nightmares, but they weren't about anything supernal. I just kept dreaming about standing in front of the mirror, unable to move. I'd wake up covered in sweat. I'd look at the mirror and the reflection would be normal or close enough to normal that I couldn't be sure I'd really seen anything off. My life became a constant cycle of fear and doubt. I tried to do some online research, but I didn't know the name of the antique shop. I didn't have a receipt. I just had this cursed object in my room. I considered giving it away, but I felt too guilty to pass this problem to someone else. Sometimes I'd stand outside my apartment, gripping my keys, trying to work up the courage to go inside. It's my own home, but it doesn't feel safe anymore. One evening I got home and I was so tired that I decided I didn't care. I wanted to confront the mirror. I walked right up to it. I looked at my reflection. I was breathing fast. I could see my chest rising and falling. My reflection did the same. I said enough out loud. My voice was shaky, but I forced the words out. My reflection's lips didn't move. Its eyes narrowed. My stomach turned and a chill ran down my arms. I said it again, enough, louder. This time the reflection stayed silent, but I heard a quiet tapping. It sounded like knuckles tapping on the inside of the glass. I jolted backward almost tripping over my own feet. I didn't see the reflection's hands move, but I kept hearing that tap tap tap. After a few seconds it stopped. I turned around and left the room, slamming the door behind me. I paced in the hallway, my body tense, my hands balled into fists. My mind was racing. I felt like I needed to calm down. I got a glass of water, drank it in big gulps, and tried to breathe steadily. I told myself I wasn't going crazy. That mirror was doing things I couldn't explain, but it was real. I had no doubt about that. I decided I needed a plan. I thought about taking a hammer to it, but I remembered the intense fear I got just considering that. I thought about trying to sell it, but who would buy it, and how would I explain why I was selling it? I didn't want to lie, and I didn't want to pass this nightmare on to someone else. I was out of answers now. Every night I see new things in that glass. Sometimes I see myself in real time, but with slight delays. Sometimes the reflection doesn't move at all while I shift my weight or scratch my arm. Sometimes I see that dark crypt with the faint flicker of light and that dripping sound. My heartbeat speeds up whenever I catch sight of those wet stone walls. They feel cold even through the glass. I can sense it in my bones. Sometimes I get the impression that if I stare too long I'll see something appear in that crypt. I have a heavy knot in my stomach that warns me not to look too deep, but I can't avoid it forever. I'm telling this story now because I need to let it out. I haven't told many people. I'm worried they'd think I'm hallucinating or making it up. I'm not. I'm just a regular guy who ended up with a mirror that shouldn't exist. I feel it watching me sometimes at night. I imagine that reflection climbing out of the frame or pulling me in. That's the worst part. One keep thinking about crossing into that crypt. I don't know what's there, but I can sense its presence. It's like a heavy pressure on my chest, reminding me that there's something on the other side waiting. I'm not sure how long I can take this. I'm afraid that one day I'll look into the mirror and never see my bedroom again. Maybe I'll see the crypt all the time. Maybe I'll see my reflection staring back with a permanent grin, refusing to let me turn away. I've tried everything short of smashing it, but I can't bring myself to do it. My legs shake at the thought of touching that twisted frame again. For now, I'm stuck with it. Every day I wake up and wonder if my reflection is going to do something worse. Every night I lie in bed listening for that tapping sound. That's all I know. The mirror is still there. It's watching me, waiting, and I can't shake the feeling that if I stare too long I'll see something that will change me forever. I'm scared I'll see something I can't and see something that'll make me lose my mind, so I try not to look, but sometimes I can't help myself. It's a sick attraction, like I'm drawn to the very thing that terrifies me. Maybe I'll break it one day, maybe I won't, but right now it's still there, hanging on my bedroom wall, daring me to look again. That phone wasn't supposed to ring. I had disconnected every cable I could find before I went to bed. I had even checked the rotary dial to make sure it wouldn't budge, but at exactly 2 in the morning I heard its metallic chime echo through my office. It wasn't a soft ring, it felt loud like something from an old movie. It startled me awake and I froze in my chair because I'd been dozing there after a long day. My heart pounded and I stared at it from across the room. The phone was on the desk by the window under a single weak lamp I left on. I didn't get up right away. I just waited for it to stop, but it didn't. I walked over, feeling my legs shake with each step. My mouth felt dry and I caught myself holding my breath. When I finally picked up the receiver, I heard this low static. At first I thought maybe it was a bad connection, but then I caught a sound behind the stat. I see it was breathing heavy, uneven, like someone trying not to speak but unable to stay quiet. I waited, my heart thumped against my ribs. The breathing went on for a few seconds and I felt my scalp tighten. Then I heard my name. It was faint, but it was definitely my name. It sounded choked, like the speaker's throat was half closed. I said hello, but no one answered. The line went dead. I put the receiver down and backed away, rubbing my arms because I felt a chill. I still tried to calm myself, telling myself it could have been some random telemarketer or an accidental dial, but that didn't make sense. The phone wasn't even connected to the wall. I thought maybe I'd made a mistake, maybe I'd left a cord plugged in. I flipped the phone around, looked for any wires, but there was nothing. The phone was just sitting there with no external power source. It was an old rotary phone with a thick coiled cord running from the base to the handset. That was all. There was no cable to the wall. I stood there for a while, checking every side of that phone. My stomach felt knotted. I could taste acid in the back of my throat. I considered throwing the phone in the trash or putting it in a closet, but I decided to leave it. I told myself I'd figure it out in the morning. I needed sleep and I was too tired to think straight, so I sat down on my office couch, turned off the lamp and tried to calm down. I dozed off, but maybe half an hour later I heard the phone again. This time it only rang once, a short, sharp ring. I jumped up and turned on the light. The phone was silent. I watched it, waiting for it to ring again, but it didn't. I felt tense and sweaty, so I decided to go home for the night. My office was only a few blocks away from my apartment, so I locked up and left. I tried not to think too hard about what had just happened. The next day I came in early to check the phone more thoroughly. It was a piece I had inherited from my grandfather's old house for